Chapter 171. Seeing that Yi Li no longer objected, Han Mingxi was very happy. He happily planned their itinerary. Junwei, I've been to Nanjiang several times. We can go to Kang Mountain first, then go west along Qingming River. We can see the phoenix flowers and Nanjiang's Lantern Festival, then go to Nanzhou's capital. What do you think? Yi Li looked at him coldly. I thought that Brother Han knew that we were in a hurry to leave. According to your itinerary, can we reach Nanzhou's capital at the end of May? Han Mingxi immediately withered and said unhappily, in that case, let's go to Nanzhou's capital first. We'll go to the Lantern Festival after Junwei is done. Looking at the pitiful Han Mingxi, Yi Li felt the veins on her forehead jump with joy. She angrily drove him out. And San stood on the side and looked at Yi Li with a worried expression. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, What do you want to say? And San frowned and said, Gongzi Han. They didn't know Han Mingxi, but Han Mingyu, as a shadow guard, could become a prince or Wang Fei. They all knew about him. He was a very difficult person to deal with. Since Han Mingxi was Han Mingyu's younger brother, he probably wasn't a good person. More importantly, Han Mingxi's reputation wasn't very good. If Wang Fei stayed with him for a long time, thinking of the consequences, and San couldn't help but tremble. Yi Li said helplessly, there are advantages and disadvantages to bringing Han Mingxi, but since he has already followed, it won't be easy for us to get rid of him. The Tianyi Pavilion's intelligence network was all over the world. More importantly, there was a kind of person who didn't want to leave. The more you wanted to get rid of him, the more he wanted to pester you. Han Mingxi was obviously this kind of person. Waving her hand, Yi Li said, Don't worry, let's not think about other things now. Let's go to Nanjiang and find Dage first. An should have found Big Brother by now, right? And San nodded. An is very good at finding people. He walked faster than us and should have already found young Master Shu. Yi Li nodded and said, Then take Han Mingxi with you. After entering Nanjiang, pay attention to the clues An left behind. Let's meet up with Big Brother first. Yes. When she went downstairs after packing her things in the morning, she saw Han Mingxi sitting in the most conspicuous position in the hall with a coquettish smile. Yi Li's head started to throb unconsciously. Han Mingxi didn't seem to feel the anger in Yi Li's eyes at all. He waved to her cheerfully. Junwei, come and have breakfast. Yi Li walked over and looked at the sumptuous breakfast on the table. She raised her eyebrows and smiled. Brother Han's breakfast is truly exceptionally sumptuous. Han Mingxi waved his hand, not caring that everyone's eyes were on him. He smiled and said, Junwei, you should eat more. When we enter Nanjiang, it won't be so easy to eat such a sumptuous breakfast. Yi Li wasn't polite and called for An San, who came down from behind to eat together. Han Mingxi looked at the silent An San and raised his eyebrows. I haven't asked for this brother's name yet. Junwei's bodyguard is quite skilled. Under normal circumstances, Han Mingxi was very self-aware. As the younger brother of the Tianyi Pavilion's master, his vision wasn't low. Although his Qinggong could be said to be one of the best, he was still lacking in martial arts. At least the bodyguard of this new friend should have much better martial arts than him. Yi Li looked at An San and said indifferently, Zhuojing. An San raised his head to look at Yi Li with some surprise. Zhuojing was his real name. After becoming Wang Fei's shadow guard, he usually wouldn't use this name. He hadn't thought that Wang Fei would know. Han Mingxi smiled and said, So it's Brother Zhuo. I'll have to trouble Brother Zhuo in the future. An San said indifferently, I don't dare. Young Master Han is too polite. The group of three had just finished eating. An San went to pay the bill. The man who had come up to strike up a conversation yesterday came over again. Beside him was the middle-aged man who looked like a steward. Young Master Chu, are you also planning to leave? This young master is the guide you invited. Yi Li nodded slightly and didn't speak. The two clearly didn't have any intention of speaking. That man didn't feel awkward at all. He smiled and said, Since young master's people are all here, are we leaving today? If so, we might as well go with you. Han Mingxi lazily fiddled with the breakfast on the table and said, Why should we go with you? Isn't it better for everyone to go their own ways? The man smiled and said, everyone is going to Nanjiang together. It's safer to take care of each other along the way, isn't it? As far as I know, once we leave Shattered Snow Pass, it seems to be the territory of the Luo Yi tribe. Yesterday, the two of you. Yi Li raised her eyes and looked at the man in confusion. Since you know that we have offended the young master of the Luo Yi tribe, why do you still insist on going with us? The man curled his lips and said, so what if it's the Luo Yi tribe? Although the people of Nanjiao are good at poison, we are not afraid of them. Yi Li secretly nodded in her heart. You have the famous sickly scholar by your side. Of course you don't need to be afraid of the poison of Nanjiang. She thought for a moment and nodded, if that's the case, then I'll have to trouble you. I haven't asked for your name. The man laughed heartily and said, this one is Zheng Kuei. I was originally an escort. Now I'm a guard to make a living. This is my steward. That's my master. And that one. The man who called himself Zheng Kuei looked at the sickly scholar leaning against the wall with his eyes closed and said, I heard that he's an expert that my master spent a lot of money to invite. But, hehe, I can't see how strong he is. His body is very weak. Yi Li nodded and said, so that's how it is. Guard Zheng is too polite. If that's the case, let's set off now. Seeing Yi Li agree, Zheng Kuei was obviously very happy. He laughed and said, this one will go and inform my master. She looked sideways at Zheng Kuei and the steward who went back to discuss with the rich merchant's master. The rich merchant's master seemed to be somewhat dissatisfied, but he still agreed. Then the four of them went back to their rooms to pack their things. Watching the four figures go upstairs, Yi Li faintly glanced at Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi lay on the table and looked at Yi Li with grievance. Junwei, what did I do wrong? Yi Li snorted softly and looked at him from the corner of her eyes. Young Master Han, can you be any more low-key? Low-key? Han Mingxi didn't understand. He asked, I'm not some famous person. Why should I be low-key? There were very few people who knew that he was young Master Feng Yu. Otherwise, they would have been surrounded by those self-proclaimed righteous people. Yi Li looked at him with a half-smile and said, it's true that you are low-key, but you have a very high-profile face. Do you think Sickly Scholar has seen young Master Ming Yu? Do you think he knows that young Master Ming Yu is the head of the Tianyi Pavilion? Han Mingxi blinked and looked at Yi Li apologetically. He said in a small voice, that, my eldest brother is friends with the head of the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce. So, Sickly Scholar has probably seen me before. It seems that he knows that we have recognized him. That's obviously the case, Yi Li said expressionlessly. Chapter 172. Why did they invite us along? Han Mingxi asked in a low voice, if it's because of my identity, he should have greeted me directly. After all, my big brother has a good relationship with the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce. Yi Li shook her head and said, it shouldn't be. Before you came, they invited me once, but I refused. Han Mingxi rubbed his chin and said, Sickly Scholar's purpose in coming to Nanjiang must not be simple. But why did he come with that rich merchant? Ordinary rich merchants can't invite him. As for the medicinal herbs business, people who do medicinal herbs business won't personally come to Nanjiang in March or April. Dachu State and Nanjiang had a lot of exchanges because of Nanjiang's rare medicinal herbs. But looking at Yonglin City's desolate appearance, it was clear that it was not the time to do medicinal herbs business. Yi Li held her forehead and said, do you think that someone who dares to be with Sickly Scholar is an ordinary rich merchant? Han Mingxi raised his eyebrows. Is there a problem? Yi Li was silent for a moment. I can't see it for now. But since they were shaken, they must figure out whether it was a coincidence or deliberate. The group quickly met at the entrance of the inn, then they left the city and went to Shattered Snow Pass. What surprised Yi Li was that the rich merchant looked like he had a big belly, but his horsemanship was actually pretty good. It was just that it made people worry for the horse he was riding. Sickly Scholar coughed the whole way since he got on the horse. It looked like he was going to cough out his heart and lungs if he wasn't careful. When they passed through Shattered Snow Pass, Yi Li turned around and saw Murong Ting standing on the city wall with a radiant face. She was happily talking to the middle-aged man next to her. Presumably, after leaving the constraints of the capital, Murongting's life was very happy. Yi Li was also happy for her good friend. She smiled faintly and turned around to follow the people in front. Drink some water. After leaving Shattered Snow Pass, they hurried all the way until the sky gradually darkened. Obviously, they had missed their lodging today. Moreover, although the wilderness of Nanjiang was very dangerous, the homes and inns of the residents of Nanjiang were not necessarily safe for the people of the Central Plains. And San skillfully entered the forest. Not long after, he came out with a pile of firewood and a pheasant. Then, he started the fire and prepared the game. Zheng Kuei also caught a few fish from the nearby river. Yi Li glanced at Sickly Scholar, who was coughing violently under the tree. She frowned and handed him some water. Sickly Scholar was obviously stunned for a moment before reaching out his right hand to take the water bottle. He nodded to Yi Li and said in a low voice, "Thank you." Yi Li nodded and sat back down. Although Sickly Scholar looked like he was on the verge of death, Yi Li would never underestimate him. It was better to stay as far away from this kind of person as possible, especially when he had a grudge against Mo Xiaoyao. Han Mingxi leaned against the tree in boredom. He watched as San prepared the game on the fire and prepared to roast it. He smiled at Yi Li and said, "Junwei, brotherswa is really not simple. I have never seen someone who can do this so neatly. Even those Jianghu people who often sleep in the wilderness can't compare." And San, who was sitting by the fire, raised his eyebrows and didn't say anything. He wouldn't tell Han Mingxi what kind of training the four brothers had gone through in the last half year under the cliff of Black Cloud Peak. In fact, the brothers still didn't understand how their master could have so many strange ideas and training methods in his head. Especially the wilderness survival training. Each of them was thrown into a vast and seemingly endless forest to accompany poisonous insects, rats, and ants for an entire month. The only weapons he carried with him were a dagger and a crossbow with only 5 arrows. In the beginning, they couldn't understand how this kind of training was useful for them who had martial arts and qigong. But after a month, an who was the first to come out of the forest with tattered clothes, defeated An Yi, and Sai, and himself. Originally, the four of them were basically evenly matched. Even if there was a slight difference between them, the one who won was definitely an arrow at the end of its flight. But that time, An displayed his prowess and defeated An Yi, then himself, and finally perished together with An Sai. They clearly didn't learn any other martial arts and their internal strength didn't even increase. An change made them both shocked and overjoyed. Only when An San went in himself did he know what An had experienced. Poisonous snakes, poisonous insects, poisonous grass, swamps, wild beasts. In the beginning, he didn't even dare to close his eyes at night. Because sometimes when he woke up from his sleep, he would find himself surrounded by a pack of wolves or a highly poisonous snake staring at him with its tongue out. Every day, he had to find food by himself and gather the things that the Wang Fei ordered. The most unlucky time was when he was trapped in a swamp for 3 hours. He almost thought that he was going to die. But in the last few days of the month, he found that he had gradually adapted to the terrible environment. Even without martial arts, he could still survive in the forest. Even if he didn't eat or sleep for a day and night, he wouldn't feel too uncomfortable. These were definitely not things that pure martial arts could do. From the day he walked out of the forest alive, he found out that the Wang Fei was secretly following them after they entered the forest. And San truly wholeheartedly submitted to this young Wang Fei. They all knew in their hearts that their master was definitely the most amazing of all the Wang Fei of the Ding country. The only thing that made An San regretful was that the original consort I had planned a lot of things to give them, but because of the prince's illness, it was interrupted. Young Master Han is right. Brother Zhuo's skill is so skilled that even the old escorts who have been in the escort business for decades can't compare. Zheng Kuei looked at the half-cooked fish in his hand, then looked at the delicious game in An San's hand that was comparable to the roasted chicken in a restaurant. He was extremely jealous. He had only caught a few fish from the river, but this serious brother had already started a fire, caught a pheasant, and roasted it. He also took the time to go into the forest to pick up some mushrooms to make soup. His master was staring at the fish in his hand with dissatisfaction. His oily face was full of disdain. Yi Li looked at Han Mingxi with a smile and said, Shuijing has been taking care of me all this time. He's smart, so he naturally learned. Han Mingxi's face was full of disbelief. He also often slept in the wild. Even now, the food he roasted was still black and he didn't dare to eat it. San calmly divided the game into 3 portions and handed them to Yi Li and Han Mingxi, as if he didn't hear his master's praise. He definitely wouldn't tell this playboy that his master could do better than him. Looking at the intoxicated young master Feng Yu holding the wild game, San suddenly felt a strange sense of superiority. Young master Zhuo is proficient in the art of poison? Sickly scholar, who was sitting to the side, drank a few mouthfuls of water as if suppressing his coughing. He raised his head and asked San. San turned to look at him and said indifferently, I don't understand. Sickly scholar raised his eyebrows and said with an expression of disbelief, there are many poisonous creatures in Nanjiang. Even most of the fungi in the forest are highly poisonous. But I see that the ones we pick are all non-poisonous. Chapter 173. San curled his lips and said lightly, the brighter the color of the mushrooms in the forest, the more poisonous they are. Even a child knows this. Sickly scholar smiled faintly, is that so? If that's the case, Zhuogongzi shouldn't casually pick things to eat. Not all poisonous mushrooms in this world are brightly colored. Thank you for the reminder. The rich merchant lord was clearly very dissatisfied with the fish roasted by his bodyguard. After eating a few bites, he threw it down and pointed at Zheng Kuei, you go hunt some wild animals. Zheng Kuei looked at the darkening sky and hesitated. The reason why they chose to camp outside the forest was because it wasn't safe in the forest at night. Sickly scholar sat up and looked at the rich merchant indifferently, if you want him to die, then let him go in. The rich merchant lord seemed to be afraid of sickly scholar. Hearing him say this, he could only shut his mouth. After eating dinner, Han Mingxi didn't seem to have the energy he had during the day. He sat at the place closest to the fire and looked at a rock with his eyes closed to rest. Third Secret finished packing his luggage and got up to jump onto a big tree not far away. He sat on the branch and silently listened to the few people chatting below. On the contrary, Yi Li was a bit bored. He sat beside the fire and chatted with Zhang Kuei. From time to time, he would throw a piece of firewood into the fire. In the chat, Zheng Kuei told Yi Li that the rich merchant lord was surnamed Liang. He was a big medicine merchant in the northwest of Dachu state. His family was very wealthy. He came to Nanjiang this time because he heard that there was a very rare medicine in Nanjiang. Moreover, it would be publicly auctioned in Nanzhou's capital city in June. Of course, there was no lack of that Master Liang bragging to himself. Yi Li told Zheng Kuei that he came from a scholarly family in Yunju. This time, he specially brought his bodyguard out to travel. As for Han Mingxi, he was a friend he met in Guangling. He enthusiastically accompanied him to Nanjiang to play. Since the other party already knew Han Mingxi's identity, Yi Li naturally didn't need to hide it for him. She only said that he was a friend she met at the Breeze and Moon Tavern in Guangling City. Hearing the words Breeze and Moon Restaurant, Master Liang's face that was full of meat immediately lit up. He pulled Yi Li aside and told her about what he had seen and heard in the Breeze and Moon Restaurant. Young Master Chu is from Yunju? Sickly scholar suddenly asked, Young Master Chu, do you know the Shu family of Yunju? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and smiled, isn't this young master joking? As a citizen of Dachu state, who didn't know the Shu family in Yunju? Although I am not fated to study at Li's-Han Academy, I have admired the few gentlemen of the Shu family for a long time. Really? Cough cough. Speaking of which, since young Master Chu admires the Shu clan of Yunju, you must have heard of young Master Qingchen's name? Yi Li tilted her head and looked over. Her tone was filled with admiration. Young Master Qingchen. Young Master Shu became famous at a young age. It's a pity that although I am half a year older than young Master Shu, I still haven't accomplished anything. I am truly ashamed. Sickly scholar raised his head and looked at her with a probing gaze. He smiled faintly and said, is that so? Perhaps young Master Chu will be able to see him when you go to Nanjiang. Yi Li was startled. Her expression was calm and she said with a trace of pleasant surprise, "Really? Young Master Qingchen is in Nanjiang right now?" Sickly Scholar sat up and said, "That's right. Young Master Qingchen is indeed in Nanjiang right now. That's great. I hope I can see young Master Qingchen when I go to Nanzhao's capital and ask him for advice." Yi Li lowered her head in contemplation and muttered absent-mindedly. Ignoring Sickly Scholar's scrutinizing gaze, Yi Li quickly calculated in her mind. Shu Qingchen had traveled the world when he was young. His whereabouts had always been unpredictable. Yi Li didn't believe that he couldn't even hide his whereabouts well. But Sickly Scholar, who was in West Hill, was able to obtain news that he was in Nanjiang, and it seemed that he was very clear about where he was. This made Yi Li have a bad premonition. Why did Sickly Scholar go to Nanjiang this time? Could it be related to Shu Qingchen? Late at night, the flames burning in the wilderness gradually died down a little. The forest under the curtain of night was silent. There were only the occasional sounds of insects and birds. Third An, who was sleeping on the branch of a tree, moved her body and coughed lightly. Yi Li, who was originally leaning against the fire and sleeping with her eyes closed, slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were clear and there wasn't a trace of sleepiness. She casually turned around and looked at the tree. Third An nodded slightly on the tree. Yi Li closed her eyes again and fell into a deep sleep. A faint fishy smell suddenly came from the air. It was accompanied by some kind of strange rustling sound. There was also a faint song that couldn't be heard clearly. It seemed like something was crawling across the grass in groups. Third An frowned slightly. He remembered something that he particularly hated. He sat up and floated down. Third An had just landed when Sickly Scholar, who was still sleeping, immediately opened his eyes. Seeing Third An frown in doubt, Third An didn't look at him. He walked to Yi Li's side and said in a low voice, "Young Master, there's movement." At the same time that Yi Li opened her eyes, Han Mingxi and Zheng Kuei also sat up at the same time. Han Mingxi lazily yawned and asked, "What's wrong?" Third An said indifferently, "Something is coming." "Something? What thing?" Third An said in a low voice, "I guess, it's a snake." "Snake? Snake?" Yi Li and Sickly Scholar said in unison. Sickly Scholar glanced at Yi Li. Yi Li stood up and said, "I smell snakes. Many snakes." Han Mingxi understood and said, "I forgot that Zhun Wei is good at making spices. Naturally, he is more sensitive to smells." Zheng Kuei said anxiously, "Let's not talk about this now. What should we do?" Han Mingxi didn't care and said, "What's there to do? Let's go." Young Master Feng Yu's Qinggong was unparalleled. No matter where they were, they wouldn't have to worry about not being able to leave. Third An frowned and said, "I'm afraid we can't leave. Listen, there are sounds coming from all directions." Other than Master Liang and the housekeeper, everyone else here was skilled in martial arts. Naturally, they could tell whether Third An was telling the truth or not. Han Mingxi snorted and quickly flew up a branch. He landed on the ground in a short while and cursed in a low voice, "Nanjiang, this lousy place, this young master is annoyed every time I come here. Where did all these snakes come from?" No one paid attention to his complaints. Third An had already quickly taken out all kinds of antivenomous insects and snakes that he had prepared in advance. Sickly Scholar shook his head and said, "There are too many. I'm afraid it's useless." People who have never seen it would never be able to imagine how terrifying that scene was. In the night, a black mass of snakes surged from all directions. "What is going on?" Master Liang screamed. The housekeeper beside him was already pale with fright and fell to the ground. "Shut up," Sickly Scholar scolded. He frowned and looked at Third An. "There are too many snakes. Using snake repellent will only make them more manic." Han Mingxi said with a face of disgust, "Zhun Wei, I should be able to bring you out. Brother Zhua should also be able to go out by himself." Third An nodded silently. Sickly Scholar said indifferently, "Since it's like this, Brother Han can bring Chu Gongzi out first." Han Mingxi didn't really leave first because he could clearly hear the threat in Sickly Scholar's words. If they really left first, Sickly Scholar would definitely shoot arrows in the back. No matter how good Han Mingxi's Qinggong was, He might not be able to avoid the poison of Yangwang Chamber's third master while flying in the air. As for Sickly Scholar's side, there was no need to think about it. Other than himself, the other 3 people didn't have the ability to go out by themselves. Chapter 174. Seeing that the snakes had already surrounded them, Yi Li frowned and said, "You still have the mood to quarrel at this time? Or do you plan to stay here and feed the snakes?" After the snakes surrounded them, they didn't immediately pounce on them. Soon, they saw a few men dressed in black walking over from several directions. They were playing a piccolo and standing far behind the snakes. These snakes obviously didn't gather here for no reason. They were controlled by someone. Zheng Kuei cursed in a low voice and scolded, "These are the southern border's snake tamers." Yi Li and Third Secret glanced at each other. If the snakes really pounced on them, they would probably be able to escape at the first moment. However, that fat and rich master probably wouldn't be able to escape. A group of snake tamers turned around and opened up a path. Then, a somewhat familiar figure swaggered over and smiled maliciously at Yi Li and the others. "Hihi, this young master said that one day you will fall into this young master's hands. It's only been a day. How about it?" Han Mingshi raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Isn't this the fool who called himself the Luori tribe's young master? That wretched youth who left in anger at the inn yesterday was wearing a set of gorgeous clothes with silver ornaments that sparkled under the moonlight." Seeing Han Mingshi's elegant and languid appearance under the moonlight, he couldn't help but stare blankly and said, "Beauty, come over here. This young master will spare you. There's no need to accompany these ugly people to their deaths." Han Mingshi's face stiffened and the corners of his eyes twitched. "You have the nerve to call others ugly?" Indeed, everyone present, including those snake tamers standing far away, looked much better than that youth. Even that fat and rich master didn't look so wretched. Hearing this, that youth was immediately furious. He stared at Han Mingshi with a twisted and fierce gaze. Yi Li coughed lightly and said with a smile, "Brother Han, although that young master is neither fragrant nor jade, you still showed mercy with your words. How can you endure his admiration like this?" Han Mingshi curled his lips and said, "Is that admiration? He's jealous, right? He clearly wants to cut this young master's face. Humph. This young master's peerless appearance is actually something that this kind of vulgar person can dream of. Did they think that he was a playboy for nothing? Would he not be able to differentiate between admiration, jealousy, and resentment? Not bad." The young man chuckled and said, "When I catch you, I'll skin you alive. Hee hee. This young master wants your face, so you better come over obediently and don't let this young master's babies ruin your face." Everyone fell silent. After a long while, Han Mingshi touched his face lovingly and asked, "Don't tell me you want to put my face on yours." The young man smiled proudly and said, "That's right." This young master thought for a long time before coming up with this idea. "It's a pity that I haven't been able to find a suitable face. Originally, I thought that pretty boy was not bad, but now, this young master feels that your face is better." Under the moonlight, Han Mingshi's handsome face suddenly became somewhat ferocious. Coveting Sir Feng Yu's face was unforgivable. The size doesn't match, right? Yi Li frowned and looked at the young man's short and thin face, then looked at Han Mingshi's perfect face shape. Han Mingshi's face was at least a third bigger than that young man's. Junwei. Han Mingshi's brows twitched as he glared at Yi Li with resentment. The young man was obviously provoked by Yi Li's words as well. He roared in anger, "This young master doesn't need you to care. This young master is going to make all of you into human skin masks. Capture all of them, and I want all of them alive. No, it's fine if that fatty is dead." The snake tamers' faces all showed signs of danger. It was easy to kill this group of people. All they had to do was release the snakes to bite them. The hundreds and thousands of snakes would definitely bite them. However, it wasn't that easy to capture them alive. These people weren't weak people. Although the snake tamers were hesitant, they could not ignore their master's orders. They could only play their flutes again to control the snakes. Boom boom. A few flames suddenly sprang up. Amidst the rapid sound of the flute, the snakes did not swarm forward. Instead, They stopped about 40 to 50 feet away from them and hesitated. While Yi Li and Han Mingxi were talking to the Luori tribe's young master, San had secretly scattered all the snake repellent they had brought all around them. Seeing the snakes continuously being controlled, the snake tamer's flutes became even more rapid and sharp. The snakes also became more restless. Yi Li raised her brows and looked at Han Mingxi. "Brother Han Mingxi, do you know how to play the flute?" Han Mingxi smiled helplessly. "I don't know how to control snakes." Yi Li was not here. "You don't need to know how to play the flute. It's best if you use your internal energy. Go over there and play." She pointed at the forest behind her. "It's best if you can move around." Although he did not understand Yi Li's meaning, Han Mingxi did not care. He shrugged and said, "All right, I'll listen to Junwei." Taking out the flute that he carried with him, Han Mingxi jumped onto the treetop and played the flute. The flute that contained internal energy was not very comfortable to listen to. At least for Yi Li, who did not have deep internal energy, it was not very comfortable. Han Mingxi stood on the treetop and played the flute while changing his position. It was completely like he was walking on flat ground. Seeing this, Yi Li could not help but feel envious. Gradually, the snake tamers were alarmed to find that the snakes did not seem to listen to their commands. Especially the snakes at the front, some even began to crawl back. They hurriedly played the flute, but these snake tamers were not proficient in martial arts. Their internal energy was also mediocre. In terms of sound, they could not compare to Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi's flute sound gradually suppressed the rapid and ear-piercing sound of the flute. On the side, Sickly Scholar seemed to understand something. He also flew over and jumped onto a branch. He casually plucked a leaf and placed it at the edge of the village to play the flute. The snakes seemed to finally be unable to bear it. The snakes around Yi Li and the others began to retreat. Some scattered, but no snakes approached Yi Li and the others. "What's going on?" the young man cried out in alarm. Several snake tamers' faces began to turn pale. They retreated one after another, but they did not dare to stop playing the flute in their hands. However, more and more snakes began to slowly scatter in all directions. Yi Li stood by the fire with a faint sneer. Snakes were afraid of Realgar and hated snake repellents and irritating things. It was their nature to be afraid of fire. As for the so-called snake tamers, they had almost no sense of hearing. They completely relied on the fluctuations in the air to sense their surroundings. The so-called snake tamer flute sound was just to train the snakes to get used to the same kind of fluctuations. Once this kind of fluctuation was disrupted, the snakes would no longer be under control. Compared to the snake venom and fire that they hated, they clearly preferred to crawl in other places. Don't. A few snakes crawled back and quickly slithered to the young man's feet. It was clear that the young man also had quite a bit of snake repellent on him. The snakes did not go up to bite him, but he was still quite frightened. San asked in confusion, would the people of the southern border be afraid of snakes? Yi Li shrugged and said with a smile, "Isn't there always two exceptions?" Master Liang wiped the sweat off his face as he said with a smile, "It's all thanks to young Master Chu's idea. We actually made the snakes retreat like this." Chapter 175. Yi Li slightly frowned, her heart was still a little anxious. If these snakes ran away, they would be able to relieve their anxiety for a while, but if so many poisonous snakes really escaped, then it would be troublesome for the passers-by. Looking at the panicked youth, Yi Li's clear eyes darkened, and she said to San, "Kill him." San never asked for a reason when Yi Li seriously gave an order. Before Yi Li's voice fell, the long sword in San's hand flashed, and her entire person had already soared into the air, shooting towards that young man like an arrow. That young man had already lost his head out of fear, and when he saw San's long sword coming towards him, he was dumbstruck, even forgetting to dodge. He could only stare blankly at the tip of the arrow coming towards him. "Have mercy." A loud voice hastily sounded from the side of the forest. "Have mercy. Chuajing," Yi Li shouted in a deep voice. San's eyes darkened, and she quickly put away her long sword, flipped in the air, and gently landed on a treetop not far away. In this way, there were 3 people on this side who were high up in the treetop, ready to attack at any time. And if the other side couldn't control the snakes in time, then they would definitely be at a disadvantage. A tall middle-aged man dressed in southern border attire walked out of the forest. His clothes had the same totem as the young man, and the aura of a superior that he inadvertently revealed made everyone understand that this person must be a person of high status in the Luoyi tribe. The middle-aged man quickly walked over, and the snakes that passed by all opened up a path, clearly very afraid of the aura of this person. "Friends from Da State, my son has been naughty and has offended you, please have mercy. My tribe will definitely entertain you as a distinguished guest." Yi Li sneered in her heart, naughty and mischievous. This man had been in the forest from the beginning, and only appeared when his son was in danger. Now he wanted to brush it off with a mere word of naughty and mischievous. Han Mingxi stood on the treetop, his slender figure moving up and down with the treetop, indeed naughty and mischievous. "Luoyi tribe's patriarch, how dare you let your noble young master run amok outside?" The middle-aged man's expression wasn't good either. He walked up to the young man and casually glanced at him. The young man immediately shriveled like a leaf being roasted by fire. He shrank back and didn't dare to raise his head to look at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man snorted lightly and stepped forward to greet Yi Li and the rest. "I'm the Luoyi tribe's patriarch, Le Jiang. This is my son, Le Nan. If we have offended you, please forgive us." This patriarch was obviously not only better looking than his son, the way he spoke and acted made it impossible to tell that the two of them were father and son. Yi Li said, "Although the way you treat your guests is a little scary, but I think Patriarch Luo should get someone to clean up these little things first." They were standing in a circle surrounded by the snake repellent and the bonfire. These snakes that had lost control had all avoided this area and crawled to other places. After a long time, even if people went to look for them, they might not be able to find all of them. Patriarch Luoyi nodded and waved her hand at the surrounding snake tamers. The snake tamers began to play their flutes again, and a few of them went to other places, obviously to look for those snakes that were running amok. After giving these instructions, Patriarch Luoyi then turned to Yi Li and the rest and said with a smile, "You all passed by my tribe's residence and were disturbed by Lenan's rudeness. Why don't you all come to our stronghold to rest first and treat it as my apology to you all?" Yi Li muttered to herself for a moment before looking sideways at the three people on the treetop. Han Mingxi had an indifferent expression, and Ansan naturally wouldn't have a different opinion from Yi Li. Instead, it was Sickly Scholar who frowned and said, "We are in a hurry and won't trouble Patriarch Le Jiang." Patriarch Luoyi raised her eyebrows and shook her head. "No matter how you say it is troublesome. Scaring the guests of the Central Plains will really damage our Luoyi tribe's reputation for hospitality. I would like to invite these guests to rest in the stronghold. Tomorrow, I will send someone to personally send you all to the capital." Hearing her words, the few Central Plains people present couldn't help but curl their lips in their hearts. The people of the Southern Plains were famous for being xenophobic, so other than a few bold merchants and people who had the ability to protect themselves, normal people of the Central Plains would definitely not enter the Southern Plains. However, compared to the other tribes in the hinterland of the Southern Plains, the Luoyi tribe that bordered the Da State could be considered warm and hospitable. If they could have a Southern Plains native to lead the way, then their journey would be much easier. Then we will have to trouble Patriarch. Seeing Sickly Scholar agree, Yi Li only raised her eyebrows and didn't refute. Patriarch Luoyi was clearly very happy, enthusiastically calling the accompanying host to help the guests pack their luggage. Yi Li and the other two originally didn't have much, so they stooped down to pick up a bag placed beside a rock and threw it to Ansan, who was still on the tree, while they kept the other one for themselves. Sickly Scholar was also very relaxed, but that Master Liang was busy for quite a while with the help of the housekeeper and guards. However, he carefully guarded his luggage and didn't let the people of the Southern Plains touch it, which made Yi Li a little curious about what was in that seemingly huge bag. Looking at the weight, it didn't seem to be real gold or silver. The place where they set up camp in the Luoyi tribe's stronghold wasn't far. Riding on a horse, they arrived at their destination in less than a quarter of an hour. Of course, their original horses were already scared away when the snakes came, and the ones that didn't run away were already in bad shape. They used the horses provided by the Luoyi tribe, which was the reason why Yi Li didn't oppose going to the stronghold. Apart from this stronghold, the next place with people and where they could buy horses was at least 200 li away. If they didn't go, it meant that they would have to walk for the rest of the journey. The Luo Yi tribe's stronghold was built halfway up the mountain, and the path wasn't as mysterious and rugged as the southern plains strongholds. Small wooden buildings were scattered on the mountainside. Because it was already late at night, the clan leader brought them to a small building that was used to entertain guests. He ordered the servants to bring them some food and hot water, then took the young clan leader Linan, who had been so timid that he didn't even dare to speak, and left. The young girls wearing foreign tribes' clothing were invited out. Han Mingxi washed his face with water in satisfaction and praised, "It's still good to have a house to live in. If I knew earlier, we would have just stayed in the Luo Yi tribe for a while." Yi Li sat at the side, curiously fiddling with the food on the table as she smiled and said, "Do you think that if we just went straight to your house, you would find snakes all over your bed in the middle of the night?" Han Mingxi imagined that scene, and couldn't help but tremble. He shook his head and smiled at Yi Li, "Speaking of which, Jun Wei, you have to be careful. You have to know that the women of the southern plains are the most affectionate, and they like fair and clean young masters like Jun Wei the most. Be careful." Ha ha. He covered his face with a folding fan, and laughed wickedly. Yi Li didn't want to be outdone, and returned the look, "Brother Han, don't worry, if I have such good luck with women, I won't forget to share it with you. Besides, there isn't a single person in this stronghold who cares about my face." At the mention of Linan, Han Mingxi's wickedly smiling face immediately darkened, and he snorted, a cold light flashing across his eyes. "Young Master Feng, you was very vengeful." And San stood by the tightly shut window, and when the two stopped, she turned around and whispered, "There's someone outside." Chapter 176. Yi Li raised an eyebrow. She stood up and extinguished the candle on the table with a wave of her sleeve. A bit of dim moonlight spilled in from the window lattice on the wall. Although it was still dusky, it didn't affect Yi Li's actions. She calmly walked to Ansan's side. "It's not to monitor us." Ansan nodded and pointed to a small house next to them. "It's to monitor them, but there's also one person watching us. It should be in passing." Han Mingxi also quickly adapted to the dusky room. He whispered with a smile, "These people are really strange. Then why did they pull us in?" Yi Li smiled, "Since they are scheming, then it will be revealed. After being tired all night, I think we should rest first." Ansan nodded and pointed to the bedroom inside. "Gongzi, go in and rest. Han Gongzi and I will stay outside to keep watch." Han Mingxi wanted to refute, but he saw Yi Li nod and turn around without hesitation. She waved to the two and went in to rest. Blinking his eyes, Han Mingxi said with grievance, "I also want to rest. Jun Wei wasn't the only one who didn't sleep well in the wilderness, okay?" And San coldly glanced at him and pointed to the bamboo bed in the hall. "You can sleep there." Han Mingxi was speechless. Was that bamboo bed half as long as him? The bed inside was obviously very big. As if seeing Han Mingxi's thoughts, and San didn't change his expression and moved to the door of the room that Yi Li went in. He took a chair and sat down. The meaning was obvious. If Han Mingxi wanted to go in, he would have to step in front of him. Han Mingxi could only angrily shrink into the bamboo bed to rest. He was secretly regretting in his heart, "Why did I say that I would live with Jun Wei?" As usual, Yi Li woke up early in the morning. Before she even got up, she knew that she probably wouldn't be able to leave today. The dripping sound from outside indicated that it was raining heavily. Yi Li had already experienced the rainy weather in the south, but this rain came too suddenly. If they had slept in the wilderness last night, they would have been very unlucky now. Thinking of this, Yi Li suddenly felt that the Luo Yi tribe's young master was not that hateful after all. She tidied up her clothes and went out. Ansan was still sitting on the chair at the door with his eyes closed, but Yi Li knew that he wasn't asleep. Hearing Yi Li's footsteps, Ansan immediately opened her eyes and looked back at her. "Let's go in and rest for a while. I won't be able to leave in the morning," Yi Li said softly as she glanced at Han Mingxi, who was curled up on the bamboo couch with a frown. Ansan hesitated for a moment, but still nodded and went in. Yi Li entered the living room and opened the window to admire the rain outside. Junwei, you're so cruel. You're taking up such a big bed, but you want me to sleep on the bamboo couch. Unknowingly, Han Mingshi had opened his eyes and was lazily lying on the bamboo couch. His bewitching eyes looked sadly at Yi Li. Yi Li looked back at him and said with a smile, "You can go in and sleep with Zhuojing now." Han Mingshi raised his eyebrows and looked at her with a smile. "There's no reason why I can't sleep with Junwei. This young master likes to be clean. I like to eat alone. I always keep the good things to myself," Yi Li said without changing her expression. Han Mingshi mumbled a few words and sat up. Frowning, he tidied up the soft dark red clothes on his body and walked to Yi Li's side to look at the rain outside the window. He sighed softly. The rainy days in Nanjiang have a different style, but it rains too often and it's a bit unbearable. Before Yi Li had time to answer, footsteps sounded outside the door. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. Opening the door, Sickly Scholar was standing at the door holding an oil paper umbrella. After half a night of rest, his complexion didn't become better, but looked even more sallow. His empty hand was raised to cover his mouth, and from time to time, there were a few muffled coughs. "Young Master Han, young Master Chu, did I disturb you?" Yi Li smiled faintly. "It's fine. Young Master, please come in." Sickly Scholar stepped into the room and looked around. His gaze fell on the door of the inner room. Yi Li smiled faintly. "Zhuojing is still resting. Young Master, please sit down." Young Master came early in the morning too. Sickly Scholar sat on the side and coughed softly before saying, "I didn't expect to meet young Master Han on this trip to Nanjiang." "Young Master Han, cough, you should know me, right?" Han Mingshi did not expect him to go straight to the point. He was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, "That's right. The reputation of the third master of the Shilling King of Hell's Pavilion has been known for a long time." From the way he addressed Sickly Scholar and addressed himself, it was clear that Han Mingshi didn't want to provoke this person, and was extremely afraid of him. Sickly Scholar smiled faintly. "Don't be so polite. The Yangwang Chamber Master and your brother are close friends, and I also have some friendship with your brother. But this young master looks very unfamiliar." Yi Li thought for a moment, then smiled faintly and said, "I'm not a person of Jianghu, so I'm a little ignorant." "Young Master, please don't laugh at me. I don't know you, and you don't know me, so we're even." Sickly Scholar stared at Yi Li, as if he was evaluating something. Han Mingshi didn't want him to keep staring at Yi Li, so he interrupted with a smile, "I heard from my brother that young master doesn't like to go out in the past few years. May I know what business you have in Nanjiang? Is there anything the Tianyi Pavilion can help you with?" Sickly Scholar was slightly stunned, then shook his head and smiled, "It's just some personal business. There's no need to trouble young Master Han." Since he didn't want to talk about it, Han Mingshi naturally wouldn't ask again. In fact, he wanted to stay as far away from him as possible. Why didn't Mo Xiaoyao kill this plague back then? Han Mingshi cursed in his heart with a smile on his face. Sickly Scholar obviously didn't want to waste time on his personal business. He looked at Yi Li and Han Mingshi and said with a smile, "What do the two of you think of this stronghold?" Han Mingshi frowned. "I've been to Nanjiang 2 or 3 times, but I didn't notice that the Luori tribe's stronghold was so close. What does young Master Chu think?" Sickly Scholar looked at Yi Li and asked. Yi Li frowned. "The Luori tribe is said to be one of the largest tribes in Nanjiang. However, I don't think there are more than 100 people in this stronghold. I heard that the tribes in Nanjiang are usually very secretive, but why would this Luori tribe's stronghold be built on the side of the road?" Han Mingshi raised his eyebrows and looked at Yi Li with a smile. "So Junwei saw through it last night. Since there are so many of them, why come here?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows. "Do we have a choice? We don't have any flattery, and there are poisonous snakes everywhere. The other party originally wanted to invite us to be guests. Being invited politely is much better than being tied up and thrown in like a dumpling. However, I'm curious as to what the other party wants to do by putting up such a formation. This one, other than offending the young tribe leader in Yonglin City, there doesn't seem to be anything that can make the other party go through so much trouble." After saying that, Yi Li's gaze fell on Sickly Scholar. Sickly Scholar sighed and said, "Young Master Chu is so young, but it's rare for him to be quick-witted. That's right, they are coming for us. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. I'd like to hear the details. I believe that the two of you also noticed last night that there are people watching us from outside. The goal of the Luori tribe is actually very simple. They are after a treasure on Master Liang. Sickly Scholar said lightly. Han Mingshi smiled and said, this one has never heard of young Master Chu changing to escort. Sickly Scholar frowned and held back his cough. He looked at Han Mingshi and smiled indifferently. That's right, I really didn't follow to protect Master Liang. Chapter 177. Han Mingshi leaned back in his chair and glanced at Sickly Scholar. I know that young master also wants that kind of thing. Since that is the case, young master can just kill that old man. Why go through the trouble of sending him to Nanjiang? The Sickly Scholar looked at Han Mingshi, and a trace of viciousness flashed across his originally delicate and smiling face. His entire person suddenly became even more sinister and gloomy, completely different from the sickly and weak scholar from before. That's right, I can kill that guy. But it is a pity, he is not an idiot. That thing is in the capital of Nanjiao. He only has the token to get that thing, and it is only half of it. In this world, other than himself, no one knows where the other half of the token is, and no one knows how to use it after getting it. Anger flashed through Sickly Scholar's eyes. It was clear that he was very angry at Master Liang's cunning. Han Mingshi raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, perhaps you can consider torture. Sickly Scholar snorted coldly. Does young Master Han really not know who he is? Han Mingshi shrugged indifferently. Seeing Yi Li turn to look at him, he smiled and said, I know. Other than the 4 wealthiest families in the Da state, the 5th family, the Liang family of the Northwest, is even richer than my big brother. Also, if my big brother loves money as much as his life, then this Master Liang is more important to money than his life. I heard that a bandit once kidnapped his favorite concubine and demanded 20,000 taels as ransom. He didn't even care. Also, don't look at how rich he is. Usually, he saves when he can. His life is worse than that of a normal merchant. Last night, didn't he boast to you that he went to the Wind and Moon Pavilion? My big brother hates him the most because he went to the Wind and Moon Pavilion for one night and only ordered the cheapest cup of tea. He didn't even spend 20 taels. If this kind of person really has any treasure, even if you kill him, he probably won't give it to you. Yi Li looked at Sickly Scholar. I am more curious why young master is telling us this information. Aren't you afraid that we'll be tempted by the money too? Sickly Scholar said indifferently, I need your help. Last night, I saw that young Master Zhuo's martial arts were not bad. As for young Master Chu, although I can't see the depth of his abilities, I'm sure he's not simple either. As for young Master Han, I naturally won't let you suffer any losses after this. Han Mingshi rested his chin on his hand and tilted his head to look at him. I thought you said you didn't need the help of the Tianyi Pavilion. Sickly Scholar nodded and said, I don't need any information from the Tianyi Pavilion. Since I happened to meet Mr. Han, I have no choice but to invite you along. Can we refuse? Han Mingshi asked. I'm afraid not. Sickly Scholar said in a low voice. His slightly gloomy gaze slowly swept across the two of them. Han Mingshi only felt as if he had been stabbed by a knife, making him uncomfortable. Yi Li's expression was the same as usual, but she couldn't help but clench her fists a little tighter in her sleeves. Sickly Scholar's smile was cold and ferocious. He elegantly raised his left hand and admired his fingers, which had a slightly different skin color from his right hand. He smiled faintly and said, I believe young Master Han won't refuse, right? Han Mingshi's expression changed. He looked at Sickly Scholar warily and said, You poisoned us? Sickly Scholar responded with a smile and didn't answer. Han Mingshi's expression darkened. Sickly Scholar seemed to have expected that Han Mingshi wouldn't refuse. He tilted his head and looked at Yi Li. What about young Master Chu? Yi Li reached out and poured herself a cup of herbal tea. She frowned slightly at the bitterness in the cold tea and said, I refuse. Refuse? Sickly Scholar was a little surprised. After being startled for a moment, he looked at Yi Li with a more threatening gaze. Young Master Chu, Are you sure? Yi Li smiled faintly. She put down the teacup and said, 2 days ago, I heard of young master's reputation. I also know that young master's use of poison is unparalleled in the world. But, unless young master plans to use an immediate lethal poison, it's best not to make a move. What do you mean? Sickly Scholar stared at Yi Li with a gloomy expression. Yi Li looked down at her hands on her knees and said softly, I heard that young master accidentally injured your heart many years ago. Although this one doesn't know much about this kind of injury, I do have some superficial knowledge about the pathology of it. In this one's opinion, if young master can't kill the other party with a flick of a finger, then it's best not to make a move. Because young master's heart may not be able to withstand a long period of violent shock, right? The killing intent in Sickly Scholar's eyes almost solidified in an instant. He gritted his teeth and said, Are you sure I can't kill you? Yi Li smiled, Young master, you can try. Sickly Scholar naturally wouldn't try. This Chu Junwei in front of him hadn't made a move the entire time and didn't seem to have profound internal strength. But his intuition told him that this indifferent youth wasn't simple. Not to mention that there was Han Mingxi eyeing him like a tiger watching its prey. There was also a strong guard in the room that hadn't appeared yet. Han Mingxi was sitting in a chair outside. He propped up half of his handsome face and looked at the gloomy Sickly Scholar. Then he looked at the calmly smiling Yi Li and blinked. He seemed to have heard an incredible secret. Haha, young Master Chu really isn't an ordinary person. But it's too late for you to regret now. Sickly Scholar said with a cold smile. What do you mean? Han Mingxi narrowed his eyes and asked. Sickly Scholar said, After I left the little building, I guessed that the person surnamed Liang was no longer in the little building. You did it on purpose? Han Mingxi said. Sickly Scholar nodded and said, Yes, the person surnamed Liang came to Nanjiang to find the Luori tribe. Last night, they didn't come to make trouble for us, but to receive him. Han Mingxi frowned and said, So what? Sickly Scholar snorted softly, What? He has already reached his destination. The people who know his whereabouts will naturally be silenced. If they didn't invite us all here, if one escaped, wouldn't all their previous efforts have been wasted? The day before yesterday, when Zheng Kuei came over to chat with us and invite us to travel together, it was your idea? Yi Li looked at Sickly Scholar and asked calmly. Yes, Zheng Kuei thought that he was just escorting the person surnamed Liang to Nanzhao to do business. I told him that the two of you have extraordinary skills. If you travel together, you can take care of each other on the way. To be honest, I originally didn't want to choose you, but there really aren't many people who want to go to Nanjiang at this time of year. But I need people with good skills to help me. It just so happens that young Master Han has some relationship with me, right? Han Mingxi smiled and said, I'm more curious why you didn't use the people of the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce. I believe that there are many people in the Yangwang Chamber who would be willing to go through water and tread on fire for you, right? Sickly Scholar's face sank. He said coldly, This is my own business. Yi Li stood up and walked to the window. She looked outside and saw that it was still raining heavily. Then she turned and said, What kind of treasure does Master Liang have that would make someone like young Master spend so much effort? It's better that young Master Chu doesn't know. After all, the less you know, the safer. For young Master Han's sake, I won't make a move against you after this. Sickly Scholar promised with a calm face. Yi Li glanced at him indifferently and said with a smile, I'm sorry, but I don't like being kept in the dark and used as a tool. Chapter 178. Sickly Scholar sneered, If you don't help me, I won't be able to get out. Take a good look outside. Han Mingxi quickly floated to the window and looked outside. The distant scenery was faintly discernible in the rain, but there was a faint strange fragrance in the air. Yi Li pulled Han Mingxi away and closed the window. Sickly Scholar looked at Yi Li and nodded, I was right, young Master Chu also has a good understanding of poisons. Yi Li shook her head, I don't know much about poisons, but a few days ago, I was drugged by a kind of knockout drug from Nanjiang, so I was more vigilant. Yi Li carefully recalled the situation at that time when she fell into Yi Yu's hands. Finally, She determined that Yi Yu didn't poison her after she entered the hall, but the knockout drug was placed there from the beginning. There were 2 half-opened pots of orchids placed at the entrance of Yaohua Palace, and there were 2 pots of the same orchids placed in the hall. Later, in the small courtyard where Mo Jingli imprisoned her, she also saw the same orchids. Of course, maybe they weren't orchids, but just looked like them. Sickly Scholar said, "Our path up the mountain has been cut off, and the flowers on the hillside outside. Young Master Han, it doesn't matter if you smell it now, it's not a big deal. This poisonous flower is only effective during the day, and it's sunny. But once the rain stops, the fragrance of the flowers will become highly toxic, making it difficult for people to move." Han Mingxi looked at him and said, "Do you have an antidote?" Sickly Scholar proudly said, "It's just a small poison, what's so difficult about it?" Han Mingxi went back to his seat and sat down. "So, unless we are willing to help you, you won't give us the antidote. Why don't we go down the mountain before the rain stops?" Sickly Scholar laughed and said, "People who practice martial arts naturally don't have to worry about whether there's a path to walk on or off the mountain. You can go out and give it a try. It's the same as luring the people and the poisonous insects away." Han Mingxi recalled the densely packed group of snakes last night and felt goosebumps all over his body. He quickly rubbed his arms and looked at Yi Li. Yi Li stood with her hands behind her back and said indifferently, "Then I can assume that young master not only has the antidote to deal with those poisonous flowers and plants, but also has a way to deal with poisonous snakes and insects. And all we have to do is deal with those people, right?" Sickly Scholar nodded in a good mood. Not bad. Her unhappiness from being poked in her weak spot finally dissipated a little. The murderous look in her eyes when she looked at Yi Li also gradually dissipated. Yi Li pondered for a moment before nodding. "I can promise you." "Hey, Junwei, aren't you afraid that he will go back on his word and kill you?" Han Mingxi reminded her in a low voice. Sickly Scholar was not a kind person. Yi Li smiled, "I believe in the promise of the Yangwang Chamber's third master. In that case, it's a deal." Hey, does that guy have such a thing as credibility? After more than an hour, the rain finally stopped. The rain in Nanjiang came quickly and the sky cleared quickly. Not long after the rain stopped, the warm sunlight sprinkled over the earth. The ground that had just been washed by the rain emitted a fresh smell of soil. If it wasn't for the pervasive fragrance, it would be even more wonderful. As soon as the rain stopped, San came out from inside. She glanced at the 3 people in the hall, 2 sitting and 1 standing. She didn't look surprised that there was an extra person. Yi Li pointed to the dry food on the table and said, "Let's fill our stomachs first. I don't think Master will bring us breakfast today." San nodded and sat down. Under the gazes of the 3 people, she unhurriedly filled her stomach. Sickly Scholar looked at San's slow chewing with great interest. He smiled at Yi Li and said, "Young Master Chu has an expert like Gajua protecting him. No wonder he dares to come to Nanjiang alone." "Brother Zhua, what did you just say? You didn't sleep last night?" San looked up at him and said indifferently, "Young Master only has me by his side. Naturally, he has to be careful." Sickly Scholar's eyes darkened. It wasn't easy to have a guard like this. From what Shuijing said, Chu Junwei usually had a lot of people by his side. Now that he had only 1 guard, it was special. Then, this Chu Junwei's identity was probably not ordinary. He glanced indifferently at Han Mingxi. Someone who could be friends with the younger brother of the Tianyi Pavilion's master was naturally not an ordinary person. Sensing Sickly Scholar's probing gaze, Han Mingxi smiled innocently at him. "Don't ask him." He also didn't know Chu Junwei's identity. The 4 of them tidied up and left the small building. The sunlight outside was just right. The fragrance of flowers in the air was getting stronger. However, with the antidote provided by Sickly Scholar, it didn't have any effect on the 4 of them. When they returned to the small building next door, Master Liang, the steward, and the guard called Zheng Kuei were indeed gone. Han Mingxi looked at Sickly Scholar with schadenfreude. "It seems they've been gone for at least 2 hours. How are you going to find them now?" As long as they had someone familiar with the terrain leading the way, 2 hours was enough for them to escape far away, even if it was raining. Sickly Scholar's lips curved into a cold smile. He said indifferently, as long as they're still in Nanjiang, they won't be able to escape from my grasp. Besides, why do you think they're waiting for us here? The place they're going to is definitely less than 20 li away from here. Sickly Scholar leisurely took out a small box from his pocket. He opened it and a small green moth flew out. The moth flapped its wings twice. It stopped for a moment on a small porcelain bottle in Sickly Scholar's hand. It then flew up again and flew into the depths of the village. Let's go, Sickly Scholar said to the three of them. He was satisfied with the small medicine bottle. The three of them followed behind the little moth. The entire village was empty. It was too dark last night and no one noticed. In this village, other than the two small buildings they lived in, the other buildings were very simple. It didn't look like a village where the common people gathered. It looked more like a temporary stronghold. The moth flew all the way into the depths of the mountain. Along the way, countless venomous snakes and insects were killed or injured by the Sickly Scholar's overbearing poison. Without anyone deliberately controlling them, these snakes and insects also knew how to avoid harm and seek benefits, so they didn't attack them in groups. After walking for more than an hour, the moth stopped at the edge of a cliff. It lingered around Sickly Scholar and didn't want to go forward. Could it be that Gongzi's moth led us the wrong way? Han Mingshi laughed. Sickly Scholar looked at him faintly. He put the little moth back into the box and said to Han Mingshi, "Go down. Go down." Han Mingshi was startled. He quickly reacted and said with a face of disbelief, "You're asking me to go down? Do you know where this is? This is Nanjiang. Who knows how deep it is? Who knows if there are poisonous snakes or monsters? You want me to go down?" Sickly Scholar said, "Your Qinggong is the best. How about you let Chu Gongzi go down first?" Han Mingshi's handsome face was pale as he looked at Sickly Scholar carelessly touching his left hand. He then looked at Yi Li and An San who were standing to the side. Although they hadn't known each other for long, Han Mingshi still knew that Jun Wei's Qinggong wasn't that good. If something happened down there, it would be too late to escape. He snorted, "Go down then, just you wait. When you open up Nanjiang, this Gongzi will kill you." Chapter 179. Han Mingshi tapped his feet lightly, his entire body fluttering like a huge dark red butterfly, then he fell down the cliff. Sickly Scholar softly praised, "Second young Master Han's Qinggong is indeed much better than young Master Mingyue's." However, it was only Qinggong. Compared to the scheming and ever-changing young Master Mingyu, Sickly Scholar did not think much of Han Mingshi. As long as he promised not to kill Han Mingshi for young Master Mingyue's sake, it would be fine. Zhuo Jing, Yi Li frowned as she stood at the edge of the cliff and looked down. She could only see billowing white clouds and not the scenery below. This cliff was probably more than twice as deep as the one below Black Cloud Peak. It was impossible to directly descend to the bottom of the cliff with Qinggong. An San stepped forward and stretched her hand out of the cliff. A silver thread with something attached to it quickly slid down the cliff. After a while, An San slowly retracted the thread and wrapped it around her palm. She turned to Yi Li and said, "Young Master, the bottom of the cliff is at least 1,000 feet, and the cliff is very smooth." Yi Li muttered to herself. 1,000 feet was close to 300 meters. Such a high cliff was actually smooth, and there was not even much vegetation. It was obviously not natural. It seemed that Sickly Scholar's moth was indeed brought to the right place. Sickly Scholar looked at An San's movements with curiosity. Just as he was about to speak, a figure came out from the bottom of the cliff and landed on the ground in a sorry state. Before he could even catch his breath, Han Mingshi began to curse, "Sickly Scholar, just you wait. If I die here because of you, I guarantee that the Tianyi Pavilion will hunt you down until you die." Sickly Scholar's expression did not change, as if he did not care about Han Mingshi's threat at all. He asked coldly, "What's down there?" Han Mingshi sneered, "What's there? What's there? Even if there's something, with your lousy Qinggong, can your lousy body go down? Don't expect this young master to bring you down, unless you want to fall to your death together with this young master." Seeing the Sickly Scholar frown, Han Mingshi mocked maliciously. It seemed that he had indeed encountered danger at the bottom of the cliff, which made him forget his fear of Sickly Scholar. He could only use sarcasm to calm his anger and fear. "Brother Han," Yi Li called out in a deep voice. There was no benefit in angering sickly scholar at this time. Han Mingshi was not an impulsive person. After being reminded by Yi Li, he quickly suppressed his anger and said, "There is a sea of flowers at the bottom of the cliff, but I guess those words are poisonous." There were many poisonous snakes in the flowers, and there were also a few skeletons. It was unknown whether they had accidentally fallen down or had been thrown down by someone. However, in the middle of the cliff, there was a large hole in the ground about 70 feet away. It seemed to be an entrance. However, he looked at sickly scholar with a smile that was not a smile and said, "The cliff was deliberately cleaned up by someone, so there was no place to borrow strength. I was not joking. With my qinggong, it is impossible for me to bring a person down without falling to the bottom of the cliff full of poisonous snakes and creatures. As for the three of you, with your qinggong, wanting to go down alone is simply a delusion." Speaking of his qinggong, Han Mingshi was very proud. No wonder there were no guards along the way. Were they certain that we would not be able to find the way? Sickly scholar muttered to himself. If the one who went down was not Han Mingshi with his qinggong, they would have died. There must be another way. I do not believe that all of those people are qinggong experts. Han Mingshi proudly said, "That is natural. Do you think that peerless qinggong is easy to learn? However, even if there is another way, can you find it now?" None of them were experts in mechanisms, not to mention that they were in the southern Xinjiang, which they were not familiar with. More importantly, those people from the southern Xinjiang were not fools. Would they just sit there and wait for them to find the way in? "You." Sickly scholar frowned as he looked at Han Mingshi. Han Mingshi quickly hid behind Zhuojing, not even bothering to poke his head out. "Don't look for me. Even if I can get in, I will not be able to. In terms of martial arts, I am not good enough. I think that even if there is an entrance, it will not be able to use qinggong. If I go alone, I will at most alert the enemy. What is in there that is so important?" Yi Li asked with a frown. "Do you have a way?" Sickly scholar frowned as he looked at her. Yi Li did not answer and repeated her question. "What is the thing that young master is looking for?" Sickly scholar snorted coldly. There were 3 people there, and he was alone. It was not realistic to want to capture Chu Junwei and threaten him. After a while, he said in a low voice, "It is a strange poison." Hearing this, the interest of the others immediately decreased by half. Han Mingshi asked curiously, "Young master is famous for his poison skills. What kind of poison in this world can tempt young master to the point of risking his life?" Sickly scholar smiled coldly, and his eyes flashed with a sinister light. "A poison that can make people beg for death." Yi Li was interested in what kind of poison could make people beg for death. There were many ways to make people suffer in this world. There was no need to risk his life to find some strange poison. As for what it meant to make people beg for death, if a person really wanted it, there were many ways to do it. How could they not beg for death? They did not want to die because they still had hope and worries. However, the sinister look in sickly scholar's eyes made Yi Li's heart skip a beat. A vague idea appeared in her mind. "Young master is a poison master. Why do you need to take the risk to find some strange poison?" Yi Li said with an indifferent expression. Sickly scholar let out a short laugh, which was filled with resentment and malice. Then, he coughed violently. "That's right, I do have a lot of good stuff, but it's not enough. The most painful poison in the world is in the southern border." "Ha ha." Yi Li looked at him with wide eyes. Her voice was slightly raised with curiosity. "I heard that the most painful poison in this world is the heartbreak bone-rotting pill. The poisoned person will have their liver and intestines broken and their bones shattered. They will cry for 49 days before dying. Could there be a poison more terrifying than this?" Sickly scholar said with a proud smile, "That's right. The heartbreak bone-rotting pill is indeed poisonous. However, it needs to be taken orally. Moreover, it has an extremely strong medicinal smell. Even if it is covered up with other smells, it cannot fool people who are skilled in medicine or have a good sense of smell. However, this is different. The poison made from it is truly colorless and tasteless. Just one drop is enough to send a person to hell, never to be reincarnated. Hidden net flower? Han Mingshi asked curiously. Sickly Scholar gave a disdainful snort. Do you think the south only has the hidden net flower? Compared to the hidden net flower hidden in the south, this is a true peerless treasure, blue sky flower. Blue sky flower? Han Mingshi was confused. The name sounds quite elegant. However, I have never heard of it. Sickly Scholar gave a disdainful snort. Yi Li frowned. She said lightly, blue sky yellow springs. Sickly Scholar said with a smile, that's right. This poison is called blue sky yellow springs. It doesn't sound like anything. Han Mingshi said. Compared to the heartbreak bone rotting pill, this name could be called poetic. Chapter 180. Sickly Scholar laughed. It's really nothing. Once this poison touches the human body, it will immediately merge into the blood vessels in the body. Unless you draw out all the blood in your body, this poison will never be cured. Even if there is a way to change the blood, as long as there is a little bit of this poison in the blood, it will quickly spread and grow in the fresh blood. Han Mingshi was confused. Why is it called blue sky underworld? Haha, one is in the sky, the other is on the earth. A person who has been poisoned by this poison will look fine on the outside, but the inside will slowly rot away. The more poison accumulates in the inside, the more beautiful the appearance will become. However, he cannot touch any human or animal. Is it contagious? Yi Li lowered her eyes and said in a low voice. No, how can it be contagious? Sickly Scholar laughed. Playing with a poison that can't be controlled and spread will cause a lot of trouble. The reason why he can't touch anyone is because any warm living thing will cause him unbearable pain and increase the rate at which his internal organs fester. Therefore, he can only hide in a place isolated from the world and let himself rot. His limbs will be paralyzed first, and he might starve to death before he rots. The three people present felt a chill when they heard this, especially when they heard Sickly Scholar's sinister voice. Even though the sun was high up in the sky, it still made their hair stand on end. That's impossible. If it was just a poison, it wouldn't be so important. Yi Li pointed out. No matter how precious a poison was, it was still a poison. Unless it was in the hands of someone like Sickly Scholar, it probably couldn't compare to an antidote pill that could cure hundreds of poisons. Sickly Scholar said in a low voice, that's right. It is said that if the blue sky underworld is combined with another medicine, it can revive the dead. The so-called antidote pill that can cure hundreds of poisons can only cure a few common poisons. However, the antidote pill made with the blue sky underworld flower can cure any poison or injury as long as the person still has a breath of life. It can also prolong life. Do you think no one will fight for such a treasure? If the one surnamed Liang made it into a pill, no one would think it was too expensive even if it cost 10,000 gold. Yi Li hid the light in her eyes and nodded indifferently. So that's how it is. It is indeed a treasure. Is young master looking for it to cure your illness? Sickly Scholar sneered and said, curing diseases and making poisons do not interfere with each other. Then, when the time comes, this humble one will get a pill. That should be a reasonable reward, right? Yi Li asked. Sickly Scholar stared at her coldly. Reward? Could it be that young master has never paid anyone for their help? Since young master said that it can be used to treat illnesses and poison, then I can assume that jade falling flower is not that rare. I'm not good at medicine, so the blue jade falling flower is useless. Therefore, a pill that can detoxify and prolong one's life shouldn't be too much, right? Sickly Scholar's expression changed. After a long while, he said in a deep voice, I promise you. Very good. I can do it myself. Sickly Scholar retorted. Letting someone bring him down made him feel like a weakling. He couldn't accept this. Zhuojing glanced at him and said, if you're not afraid of falling to your death, young master can try it himself. You. Sickly Scholar's expression darkened. He saw Yi Li wave her hand at him. She had already picked up the rope and brought it to the place Han Mingshi pointed out. She skillfully fixed the iron hook at a certain place and then threw the rope down. Yi Li grabbed the rope and slowly slid down the cliff. Han Mingshi poked his head out to look. He could still see her grabbing the rope and slowly sliding down the cliff. It seemed slow, but her movements were strangely skilled and fast. In a short while, she had already disappeared into the clouds. After a while, the rope that was originally swaying gently calmed down. Then it shook even more violently and the iron hook that was fixed to the rock gradually broke away. Ah! Han Mingxi anxiously wanted to grab it. And San said in a deep voice, "It's fine. Young master has already arrived." Sure enough, after the iron hook was released, the rope at the bottom seemed to be pulled down halfway and quickly slid down the cliff. On the side, San had already started to prepare according to Yi Li's method. Sickly Scholar didn't argue anymore. When San went down, he directly used Qinggong to land beside San and grabbed him tightly. The two of them began to move down. This time, they were clearly much slower than Yi Li. Han Mingxi stayed alone at the edge of the cliff. He curiously looked at the iron hook and thin rope that was tightly gripping the huge rock. He muttered softly, "Jun Wei is really a strange boy." When Yi Li slid down more than 60 zhong, she saw a cave that was about the height of a person not far away. She couldn't help but rejoice in her heart that when she discovered that the rope was thin and strong, she had lengthened the length of the rope by a lot. Otherwise, she probably wouldn't have been able to reach here. Gently swinging to the right, Yi Li accurately landed on the edge of the cave. She stood up straight and firmly stood on the edge. Han Mingxi didn't see wrongly. This was indeed a very deep and bottomless cave. It was like a passage that was cut in the cliff. In front of her was a pitch-black area that led to an unknown place. Looking at the obvious new footprints on the ground, it seemed like these people were very confident. They didn't even send someone to guard the entrance. Yi Li carefully put away the rope and walked a few steps forward, waiting carefully. After a while, San brought Sickly Scholar to the entrance of the cave. The two of them had just stood there. Before San even had the rope, Han Mingxi lightly landed and swept into the cave. They really did enter from here. Yi Li pointed to the footprints on the ground and the top of their heads. "Be careful, there should be a mechanism up there. When I came down just now, I looked carefully. There should be some kind of mechanism on the cliff that can be controlled, so they didn't use Qinggong to climb down. It's a pity that we don't have time to slowly look for it." Sickly Scholar's face wasn't very good. When he came down just now, although it didn't take much effort to be carried by San, it still wasn't good. "Let's go. Don't worry about the mechanism first." Yi Li frowned and asked, "Can you resist coughing?" Nodding somewhat stiffly, Sickly Scholar took out a bottle of medicine and poured it all into his mouth. His face became even more unsightly. "Don't worry, I won't cough again." Yi Li nodded. San took the lead and walked in front. Sickly Scholar followed. Yi Li and Han Mingxi brought up the rear. After walking for a while, the tunnel became gloomy and dark. But it still looked dry. After the light completely disappeared, Sickly Scholar took out a match and lit it. Yi Li frowned. Lighting a fire in a tunnel with thin air really wasn't a good idea. But there was no other way now. Han Mingxi followed behind. Looking at San and Yi Li, one on the left and one on the right, he raised his eyebrows and laughed in a low voice. "Jun Wei, aren't you guys too nervous?" Yi Li rolled her eyes at him. "Compared to the outstanding Qinggong Master Han, how can I not be nervous?" Sickly Scholar turned back to look at the three people. Holding the match, he continued to walk forward. This tunnel built in the mountain clearly didn't exist for the purpose of creating a diversion. So they didn't encounter any forks along the way. Inside the labyrinth. And the terrain kept going downwards. When Yi Li estimated that they were almost at the foot of the mountain, they finally heard movement in front. Sickly Scholar raised his hand to extinguish the match. Standing at the corner, he looked out. Sure enough, he saw two men wearing Nanjiang clothing standing not far away. Behind the two was a door. The noise was coming from inside. Chapter 181. The two guards clearly didn't think that anyone would come from this direction, so they were really talking and laughing in a low voice. But the straight passage in front of them was at least 100 meters long and was quite narrow. None of them could place the two gatekeepers at such a distance without making a sound. And if these two people made any movements, It would definitely alert the people inside. Sickly Scholar silently took out an exquisite box from his chest and aimed it in front of him. With two whooshing sounds, the two southern border people immediately froze. The four people quickly sneaked over. Sickly Scholar was the first to flash through the door. Yi Li paused when she passed by the door. She turned her head and saw that the two people were still standing with a trace of black blood flowing out of their lips. It was clear that they were no longer breathing. Her eyes darkening, Yi Li also flashed through the door. The inside of the door was completely different from the darkness and coldness of the passage outside. It was hot and bright inside. Not far away, there were people coming and going, and the security became much tighter. But the four of them were all above average experts, so it wasn't difficult for them to avoid these guards. Crouching behind a barrier formed by a large rock, Han Mingxi looked outside curiously. It seemed like there was a cauldron of voices outside, and there was also the sound of iron being hammered. "What are they doing?" Sickly Scholar indifferently said, "They are forging weapons." He pointed to the distance where there were already many finished weapons. Third Secret looked and made a hand gesture to Yi Li. Yi Li understood and nodded. The weapons these people were forging weren't weapons that people of Jianghu or martial arts liked, but conventional weapons used on the battlefield. With so many people producing weapons, it was clear that they were forging weapons for a certain army. "This isn't related to us, let's go." Sickly Scholar wasn't interested in what weapons these people were forging. The only thing he was interested in right now was the falling blue sky flower. "Do you know where that surnamed Liang is?" Han Mingxi asked. Sickly Scholar sneered, "He can't run away." Han Mingxi nodded, "I remember now, you poisoned him. Where's your little moth?" Sickly Scholar glanced at him coldly, got up and walked to the other side. Han Mingxi shrugged and smiled at Yi Li before following her. And San said in a low voice, "Young master, these weapons were made for a certain army in Dhu state." Yi Li raised her eyebrows, "How do you know?" And San pointed to a row of knives not far away and said, "Nanjiang people are used to using short knives. West Hill people's knives have thicker bodies. As for the northern tribes, their cavalry was the strongest. They preferred long weapons or broadswords. This type of sword is commonly used by our Dhu state soldiers." Yi Li nodded and got up to follow Han Mingxi and Sickly Scholar. Sickly Scholar's guess wasn't wrong. This was indeed a large underground weapons factory. There were two large caverns that were busy forging weapons. Most of the blacksmiths were from the Central Plains, but there was also a portion of them from the Nanjiang. The two followed Sickly Scholar to avoid these people. They kept going down, leaving the cavern where the weapons were being forged and entering another underground cavern. Compared to the crude caverns before, this one was more like a decorated underground palace. The ground was covered with beautifully carved marble and comfortable and beautiful carpets. "Are those people dead or not?" As the four approached, a sharp voice came from inside. Yi Li frowned. It was the voice of the wealthy merchant, Master Liang. At this time, his voice didn't carry the same pride and disdain as before. Instead, it sounded more anxious and murderous. "Don't worry, they definitely won't be able to escape." The voice of the Luo Yi tribe's chief, Le Jiang, sounded. "Why didn't you send people to kill them directly?" Master Liang said with dissatisfaction, "That Sickly Scholar is very scary. If we don't kill him now, we will leave behind future troubles. If it wasn't for him following me, I would have already reached the Nanjiang. But no matter what, we can't shake him off, and that person surnamed Han, he obviously knows that sickly person. We definitely can't let them. No matter the price. No matter the price." Le Jiang laughed coldly and mocked, "Who's paying the price? Do you think I don't know that those people aren't simple? Even the snakes can't do anything to them. Every man in my Luo Yi tribe is incomparably precious. How many people would we have to sacrifice to fight them? Do you think my Luo Yi tribe has as many people as your Dhu state and can't be killed? Don't forget." Master Liang angrily shouted. Le Jiang said loudly, "Don't worry, I didn't forget what I should do. But it's best if you don't order me about things outside of what we agreed on." The people inside seemed to be stunned. After a while, they heard Master Liang say, "But, if those people escape, Do you think they will let us go? I don't know about the other 3, but I think you should have heard of that sickly person's reputation. He's the 3rd pavilion master of the Shilling Yangwang Chamber. Why did you provoke the people of the Yangwang Chamber? Le Jiang was clearly very angry and shouted sternly. How would I know? I had just left for a few days when he mysteriously came looking for me. I didn't even dare to let him go. That person is famous for taking revenge for the smallest grievance. What could I do? So you brought him along to the southern border. Le Jiang gritted his teeth for a while, then snorted and said, I know, I will send people to deal with them as soon as possible. Don't worry, the road down the mountain has already been sealed. Right now, the mountain is full of poisonous insects and snakes. Even if he is the sickly scholar who is good at using poison, I don't believe he can poison an entire mountain of poisonous insects and snakes. Anyway, be careful. You must see his corpse. If you had killed them from the start, you wouldn't be in so much trouble now. Le Jiang sneered and said, he has been following you closely. Do you think we can kill him first or he can kill you first? I will go order people to do things, you stay here first. Don't forget your things. If the master doesn't get what he wants, you know the consequences. Master Liang's breath suddenly stopped, and he quickly said, I know, I have already brought half of the token. Give the other half to me. Le Jiang snorted and said, this originally belonged to our southern border. Master Liang didn't show any weakness when it came to benefits. The thing is in my hands, only I know how to get it. That was entrusted to the Liang family by the late king of Nanzhao for safekeeping, not for you. Le Jiang said in a low voice. Haha, so what? You also know that it belongs to the Nanzhao royal family and not yours. Master Liang laughed and said, it's already very good that I didn't give it to the Nanzhao royal family, isn't it? Didn't we offer a higher price? If you give it to the Nanzhao king, you won't get anything other than a few words of thanks. Le Jiang sneered. Master Liang said, you want the treasure, I want the money. Isn't everyone taking what they need? So, you better quickly give me the other half of the token and stop playing tricks. This mountain has already been dug up by you. Without me, you wouldn't have found the treasure. Also, don't think about killing me to silence me. Don't forget that behind me is. Chapter 182. Master Liang's smug tone clearly made Lei Jiang uncomfortable, but there was nothing she could do. She could only say coldly, I know, I will bring it over in a moment. It is best if you don't play any tricks. Master has said that you must see the item in half a month at the latest. Otherwise, even if you have the emperor behind you, it is useless. Master Liang's smug laughter stopped. After a while, he finally said, I know, do not worry. I know the relationship between the prince and your master. I am not someone who does not know the limits. As long as you give me the token, I promise to deliver the item to you when we reach Nanzhao. That would be best. Lei Jiang said. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. The room finally returned to silence. Only Master Liang's slightly muffled breathing could be heard. What to do? The 4 stood in a hidden corner. Han Mingshi signaled with his eyes to Sickly Scholar. Sickly Scholar lowered his eyes. A dark smile flashed across his already dark face. Han Mingshi's body trembled as she looked pitifully at Master Liang, who was pacing back and forth anxiously. I wonder what kind of torture this old man will be subjected to. A short while later, Lei Jiang's footsteps sounded again. Lei Jiang, who had returned to the room, threw a small wooden box to Master Liang with a dark expression. I have already ordered people to deal with those 4 people. You have the item. In a moment, I will send someone to send you to the capital of Nanzhao. Master Liang opened the box and looked inside. He nodded in satisfaction. Very good, since this is the case, we will not waste time. Where are my steward and guards? Lei Jiang snorted disdainfully. Your steward's legs are still weak and can't walk. As for that guard, he is even more useless. When he came down, he fell off the cliff. The people of the Central Plains are useless. You. Master Liang suppressed his anger and said, I know, send me to Nanzhao as soon as possible. Very good. Lei Jiang nodded in satisfaction. Rest first, we will depart soon. Outside the hall, Yi Li glanced at Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi shook his head silently. There were indeed many corpses at the bottom of the cliff, but they were all bones that had been exposed to the wind and rain for many days. Zheng Kuei's body was not among them. Most likely, Zheng Kuei didn't slip and fall off the cliff. Instead, he was killed by these southern wilderness people. Sickly Scholar wasn't in a hurry to do anything to Master Liang. This was because the two southern Jiang people who were poisoned to death by Sickly Scholar had already been discovered. The originally quiet underground palace suddenly became noisy. Master Liang left under the protection of many guards. Yi Li and the other three could only split up to avoid being searched by the guards and prepare to leave. And San naturally went with Yi Li. Han Mingxi could only follow Sickly Scholar unwillingly. Young master, Yi Li shook her head and said, let's not leave yet. Let's go in and take a look. Without Sickly Scholar and Han Mingxi in the way, it would be easier for them to act. He carefully sneaked into the depths of the underground palace. This underground palace wasn't too big. It was only divided into 7 or 8 rooms. The two of them searched through all the rooms, but they didn't find anything useful. Finally, they stared at the room in the deepest part of the room. Unlike the other rooms, this room's door was tightly shut. There were 2 southern wilderness people standing guard at the door with weapons in their hands. Yi Li glanced at San and skillfully made a hand gesture. You left, all right. San nodded. The two lightly approached the door. Then, at the same time, one on the left and one on the right, they restrained the 2 guards. San silently twisted the other person's neck. Yi Li looked at the unconscious person in her hand. She frowned and placed the person in a hidden place. Looking at the lock on the door, Yi Li frowned. She took out a golden hairpin from her sleeve and gently twisted it. She pulled out a sharp golden needle from the golden hairpin and twisted it a few times in the keyhole. With a catcher sound, the lock was opened. Yi Li nodded to San, who was in the dark. She pushed open the door and flashed through the door. San vigilantly squatted in the dark and watched the movements all around. After a while, Yi Li flashed out from inside and locked the door again. Probably because Han Mingxi and Sickly Scholar's group attracted too many forces, Yi Li and San clearly felt that the number of people searching was much less than before. Along the way, they followed the markings that Han Mingxi secretly left. In less than half a quarter of an hour, the two saw the light of the cave entrance in front. But at the same time, there was still a distance from the cave entrance and they could already smell the dangerous fragrance of flowers coming from outside. It was exactly the same as the fragrance of the flowers on the mountain. San took out a few pills and handed them to Yi Li. Yi Li crushed them and put them under her nose to smell. She whispered with a smile, "Where did you get these from, Sickly Scholar?" Without outsiders present, San's expression became a lot more lively. With a slightly proud smile, she said, "That's right, he has too many poisons on him. I was afraid of making a mistake, so I didn't dare take more. This is the kind of medicine he gave us before. It can last for about half an hour." Great. The 2 people each took a pill for a quarter of an hour. San took the lead and walked to the cave entrance to take a look. Only then did she turn around and beckoned to Yi Li. The 2 carefully flashed out of the cave entrance but were stunned by the scene in front of them. In front of them was a vast expanse of bright red. The cave entrance was less than 2 meters below the cliff. At the bottom of the valley, there were all big red flowers blooming. Moreover, almost every flower had a red and black snake coiled around it. There were even some that climbed and wandered on the flower branches. Yi Li could finally understand Han Mingxi's mood when he couldn't help but curse when he came down. This damned place really made people feel a chill in their bones. However, the exit was in such a dangerous place. It wasn't arrogant of the southern border people to not have to be on guard. "Can we go over?" Yi Li pointed to the cliff and asked. San looked and nodded. "It shouldn't be a problem. Be careful. If you fall, no one can save you." As long as they fell into the sea of flowers, they would be swallowed by the flowers and snakes in an instant. San frowned. How will young master go over? He could use Qinggong to fly over, but he definitely couldn't bring someone over. Young Master's Qigong probably wasn't enough for him to fly over. The terrain here was too low and ropes couldn't be used. If he wasn't careful, he could be bitten by the snakes that could jump up at any time. Yi Li helplessly sighed. This broken place really gives people a headache. However, if we can get out, this adventure is worth it. You go over first. I'll go another way. And San didn't move. Although he knew that Wang Fei was very strong, he really couldn't see any other way. It wasn't safe to stay here. Although there was no one here now, it didn't mean that no one would come. Looking at San's stubbornness, Yi Li helplessly waved her hand. Forget it. I'll go over first. You stay here and watch. After I go over, you can go over. I really don't know why you guys are so stubborn. San said in a deep voice, we are Young Master's shadow guard. Naturally, we should put Young Master's shadow guard first. Yi Li rolled her eyes at the sky. Thanks. It would be better if you had more confidence in me. It wasn't until the sky gradually darkened that Yi Li climbed out of the cave. Using the dagger in her hand, she climbed up the cliff. Before she climbed a bit, she would look down at San, who was following behind her, and ask, "What are you doing?" San said in a deep voice, "I'm with Young Master." Chapter 183. You think I want to be like this? If I had your Qigong, I would have gone over directly. Yi Li looked at San in annoyance and continued to climb. San had already reached Yi Li's side and said, "This cliff is at least 100 zhong high. If Young Master wants to climb up directly, I'm afraid it will be a bit difficult." Yi Li laughed in a low voice. "Who said I have to climb all the way up? Just a little bit more will do. Wherever there is a protruding rock, that's it." San looked at a rock that was protruding not too far away and nodded. "I understand. Young Master, I'll go over first. Be careful," Yi Li instructed. San nodded. Her left foot tapped on the cliff and her entire body shot out. However, perhaps because of her previous climbing posture, she seemed to be exhausted when she flew into the air. Although she could borrow strength from the flowers on the ground, if she was bitten by a snake, they wouldn't be able to find the antidote right now. Yi Li cursed in a low voice and the dagger in her left hand shot out towards San's feet. San once again soared into the air with the dagger and landed on the opposite side of the mountain with a few leaps. After losing a dagger, Yi Li spent a bit of effort to climb up the protruding rock on the cliff. The rock wasn't big. Even if Yi Li leaned against the cliff, she could only barely stand. This should be a protruding piece of a huge rock that grew in the mountains. After standing firm on the rock, Yi Li took a breath before taking out a rope from her bag. She fixed one end of the rope onto a sleeve arrow and shot it over. San caught the other end of the rope and found a place to fix it. Then she shook the rope to inform Yi Li that she was ready. Yi Li also found a place to secure this end of the rope. She pulled hard on the rope before she grabbed it and slid it downwards. Young Master. Seeing Yi Li land safely, San quietly let out a sigh of relief. Yi Li patted her clothes and said, "Let's go. This should be the mountain behind the village we lived in before. We should be able to find the way out from here." San nodded and followed behind Yi Li, saying, "Gongzi, I know where this place is. This is the Snake Valley." "Snake Valley?" Third Secret nodded and said, there were some seniors in the Shadow Guard who had followed the prince to the southern border. It was said that there was a snake valley in the southern border that was full of red snake poison flowers. However, it was said that the prince had burned down the Snake Valley. Unexpectedly, it had recovered in less than 10 years. However, the position doesn't seem right. The Snake Valley should be in the southwest of southern border. Why is it so close to Shattered Snow Pass? Yi Li shook her head and said, "Someone must have deliberately left this place. Didn't you notice that the snake venom flowers were all arranged in a row? Even the distance between each flower was almost the same. They definitely didn't grow naturally. And those snakes. Even if the snake poison flower was revived, it was impossible for there to be so many scarlet snakes here. Whether it was the flowers or the snakes, they should all be planted and raised by humans." Recalling the tranquility of the sea of flowers just now, San couldn't help but curse in a low voice, "Are the people of southern border crazy? Such dangerous things. The people of southern border aren't afraid of snakes. Yi Li smiled and said, presumably, the people of southern border arranged such a snake valley here in order to hide the things in the belly of the mountain. Weapon foundry? San asked doubtfully. Yi Li smiled and said, no, there are more interesting things. Let's leave here first. Did you see Han Mingshi's mark? San was squatting on the ground and looking at the things on the ground. Something probably happened to them. This mark was placed very messily. It was already night time. There were no footprints or anything like that at all. San also looked for a long time before she found the mark left by Han Mingshi. Yi Li frowned and squatted down to look at it, thinking in a low voice, it's been 4 hours since we separated from them. They should be able to walk about 20 li in 2 hours. Both of them know Qinggong, but Qinggong isn't used for hurrying, so let's say 30 li. Under normal circumstances, they should be 60 li away by now. Then, Han Mingshi was plotted against. Or were the two of them caught together? Sickly Scholar shouldn't have plotted against Han Mingshi. Tianyi Pavilion has a lot of spies. Someone in Yonglin City must have seen Sickly Scholar and Han Mingshi together. If something happened to Han Mingshi, Sickly Scholar wouldn't be able to explain to Tianyi Pavilion Master. San said. Yi Li frowned and said, then, they might have been caught. San, let's split up and see if Han Mingshi left any other marks. If something happened to Han Mingshi, not only Sickly Scholar, but also Han Mingyu wouldn't be able to explain. After all, she went to find Han Mingshi first, and Han Mingshi followed her to Nanjiang. If they were really caught, they could only pray that Han Mingshi hadn't been killed yet. In a hidden village somewhere in Nanjiang, Han Mingshi was lying weakly on the ground. His body was tied up tightly by ropes, and he couldn't move. Sickly Scholar, who was not far from him, was even more miserable. Not only was he chained up, but he was also covered in scars. At this time, he was coughing constantly, looking like he was half dead. Han Mingshi didn't care about his current appearance. He looked at Sickly Scholar with a smile and said, how are you? Can you still hold on? Are you so sure that they will come to save us? Sickly Scholar coughed softly and raised his head to ask. Han Mingshi smiled and said, I believe that Jun Wei won't abandon me. Sickly Scholar snorted and said, I believe that he will save you for the sake of the Tianyi Pavilion. Han Mingshi didn't get angry and said with a smile, so what? He won't come to save you for the sake of you being the third master of the Yangwang Chamber of Commerce, right? Now it seems that we can only wait for Jun Wei to save us, right? As for you, third young master, why didn't you find someone to save us? Han Mingshi looked at the Sickly Scholar who was hung up from the ground with a sidelong glance. Her stomach was filled with resentment. If this guy didn't force them to find the blue falling flower, how could he be so unlucky as to fall into the hands of these people? He hadn't seen the blue falling flower yet, but it was possible that they were about to go to hell. That would really be what Jun Wei had said about going to the ends of the earth. Sickly Scholar coughed a few times and said, since you have so much confidence in Chu Junwei, why do you keep muttering here? Han Mingshi choked and said in a low voice, didn't you see the place we came out of? Jun Wei is different from you. He doesn't have any medicine to restrain the poisonous snakes. Who knows if they can come out or not? Maybe they will be knocked out by the ghost flowers as soon as they come out of the cave. And, those poisonous snakes. Sickly Scholar was silent for a moment and said indifferently, when we came down from the cliff, Shuijing took some medicine from me. Seeing Han Mingshi stare at him, he curled his lips and said, don't look at me like that. I only found out about it after I broke up with them. He took the anti-knockout drug and the muscle-weakening powder from me, the kind I gave you on the mountain. Han Mingshi rolled his eyes, so you could only give me one kind of medicine. It stinks to death. Chapter 184. Don't worry, they're fine. Sickly Scholar held back his cough and said in a low voice. Han Mingshi glanced at him. How do you know? That surnamed Liang couldn't wait to kill us. But Le Jiang didn't make a move. He must be waiting for them to come. They want to catch us all in one fell swoop? Han Mingshi frowned. Sickly Scholar said, don't forget that Chu Junwei was behind us the whole time. When we left the cave, they didn't follow us at all. After we left, They must have done something behind us. That's why we have to catch them. Do you think they didn't see what you left behind on the way? Han Mingxi said angrily. You knew they were using us to lure Chu Junwei. Why didn't you remind me? Sickly Scholar sneered disdainfully. Why should I remind you? At least Chu Junwei still has a chance to save us. If he doesn't come, you and I are dead. If he comes, he might die with us. So what? Pu. The window outside made two clear sounds. The two of them stopped and looked at the window at the same time. A nimble figure quickly jumped in through the window. He turned around and smiled at them. Brother Han, don't worry. I definitely won't die with you. Junwei. Han Mingxi called out in surprise. Sure. Yi Li raised a finger to cover his mouth and blinked at him. Han Mingxi quickly lowered his voice and said, How did you get in? This stronghold is full of ambushes. Yi Li smiled. There's no such thing as a 100% safeguard in this world. It just depends on whether you can find a place to break through. Ah. Brother Han, and Third Master, you all owe me a life. Sickly Scholar snorted. That'll have to wait until we're out of danger. Chu Junwei must have heard the conversation between him and Han Mingxi. But looking at the youth's bright smile, Sickly Scholar wasn't sure if he was holding a grudge. All right, you're right, Yi Li said helplessly. He pulled out his dagger and quickly cut the ropes on Han Mingxi's body. He casually threw him a sword and said, It's not easy to find a suitable weapon in Nanjiang, just make do with this. Han Mingxi caught the sword and said with a smile, Thank you, Junwei. The ropes on Han Mingxi's body were easy to get rid of, but the iron chains on Sickly Scholar's body were not so easy to get rid of. Yi Li spent a while to untie the iron chains. Sickly Scholar stretched his muscles and asked, Where is your imperial bodyguard? Yi Li smiled and said, He is preparing a big gift for the Luo Yi tribe. Walking to the window, Yi Li imitated a few birdsong of different lengths. Not long after, a certain part of the stronghold suddenly became noisy, followed by even more places. In just a moment, it seemed as though the entire stronghold was bustling with noise and excitement. Yi Li smiled with satisfaction and said, All right, let's go. As soon as Sickly Scholar pushed the door open, several feathered arrows were shot at them. Han Mingxi quickly grabbed him and pulled him back. Yi Li kicked the door. Behind them, several arrows were shot at the wooden door. Sickly Scholar angrily glared at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled kindly at him and said, This is the thank you gift for the third leader who invited me to die with you. Sickly Scholar knew that he was in the wrong, so he snorted and didn't say anything. The archers outside were vigilantly staring at the door. With a bang, the wooden door was opened and a shadow rushed out. Whoosh whoosh. A cluster of feathered arrows was shot out. Bang bang. Two people came out of the windows on both sides of the small building. With a few whooshing sounds, several archers felt a piercing pain in their bodies and fell down one after another. Yi Li walked out of the door and glanced at the cloth bag on the ground that looked like a hedgehog after being shot by the arrows. She also saw the corpses lying on the ground. Her eyes darkened slightly. Let's go quickly. Zhuo Jing's side won't be able to hold on any longer. At this moment, the entire stronghold was in chaos and several places were ablaze. It seemed that Zhuo Jing had set a lot of fires and the places he had set were not ordinary places. Not far away, a few strange bird cries could be heard. Yi Li led Han Mingxi and Yi Li in that direction without hesitation. When they passed by a spring, Sickly Scholar sneered and took something out of his pocket and threw it in. Han Mingxi saw this and his eyes flashed. He didn't say anything and quickly followed Yi Li in front. By the time they arrived, third leader was already surrounded and was clearly struggling to hold on. Yi Li looked around and saw that all the important people in the stronghold were present. No wonder they had sent over 10 people to guard that place. Yi Li thought of something she had taken from the underground palace. It was clear that in Le Jiang's eyes, that thing was much more important than Han Mingxi and Sickly Scholar's lives. Saving 2 and losing 1, this really isn't worth it. Yi Li helplessly frowned. Brother Han, can you catch that old man? Yi Li asked softly as she pointed at Master Liang who was under heavy protection. Han Mingxi frowned. There are too many people around him. Also, that old man is too fat. Sickly Scholar handed over 2 things. Throw this into the air and feed this into that surnamed Liang's mouth. That's more like it. Han Mingshi nodded as he took it in his hand. Third leader's expression was indifferent as he looked at the people wearing southern border clothing surrounding him. He mercilessly waved the weapon in his hand. Zhuojing, hold your breath. Han Mingshi's voice suddenly sounded. A dark figure flew through the air and charged into the crowd. Third leader instantly held his breath. Southern border was different from Xiling. There weren't many people who understood the language of the Central Plains. So as soon as Han Mingshi landed, a bunch of people fell to the ground. Third leader also took the opportunity to escape the siege and jumped onto the roof. Han Mingshi successfully landed beside Master Liang. He didn't see him lying on the ground moaning. He opened his mouth and stuffed the medicine in. He patted his face with a smile. Old man, you're finished. Le Jiang was one of the few southern border people who didn't fall. Seeing the people lying on the ground, his expression was extremely ugly. He looked at Master Liang who was crying for help. It was like he was looking at an enemy and a scourge. Damn Central Plains people. What did you do? Han Mingshi was in a good mood. The gloominess of the day had dissipated by half. He picked up Master Liang and threw him towards Sickly Scholar. He laughed. Chief Luo Yi, you still have the nerve to ask us what we did. Can't you think about what you've done? Le Jiang snorted and said disdainfully. Do you think a small poison can stump our Luo Yi tribe? Han Mingshi shrugged indifferently. The poison isn't mine. What does it have to do with me? Why don't you let your people stand up? Sickly Scholar carried the fat old Master Liang out. At this moment, old Master Liang's face was as black as ink, and he looked like he was on the verge of death. It was obvious that he was poisoned with a strong poison. Lei Jiang was shocked. Although he was good at using poison to drive away snakes, he couldn't tell what poison old Master Liang had been poisoned with. Moreover, this Central Plains wealthy merchant that he hated couldn't die now. What do you want? Chapter 185. Sickly Scholar said indifferently, let us go, don't let anyone chase after us. Otherwise, I'll kill him. Lei Jiang thought for a moment and nodded, all right. But, return the things you took from the underground palace to me. He pointed at Yi Li and Ansan, his eyes filled with killing intent. Yi Li blinked and innocently smiled, it's not anything good, is there a need to? I'll just return it to you. Who knows what you're writing on it? Lei Jiang stared at him suspiciously. If you don't understand, why did you take it? Yi Li smiled. If it's something important, I suggest you don't decorate it so beautifully. Isn't it obvious that you're asking people to take it? This young master's favorite thing in life is those gorgeous little trinkets. Here, I'll return this useless broken thing to you. After saying this, Yi Li took out something and threw it over. Lei Jiang caught it in his hands. It was a dark wooden box. On the box, there were a few twisted words that he didn't know if it was a picture or a word. It could be seen that the box originally had some decorations on it, but now it was full of uneven holes. The decorations on it were obviously taken away by someone. Lei Jiang checked the box and found that there were no signs of it being triggered. He let out a sigh of relief. The expression on his face also became better. Looking at Yi Li arrogantly playing with a shiny golden object in his hands, he smiled and said, there are a few other things that I took from the table. I believe that Patriarch Lei Jiang won't be so stingy as to not even let me leave a souvenir, right? Lei Jiang snorted, you can leave. He obviously knew what was missing from the underground palace. It wasn't anything important, so he was too lazy to pursue it with them. Sickly Scholar dragged Master Liang and warned him, don't play any tricks, otherwise I'll make sure he dies without leaving any ashes. Yi Li and Ansan had already prepared horses. Once they left the village, the 4 of them mounted the horses and rushed towards the northwest. It wasn't until the sky gradually brightened that they finally saw the main road. They all breathed a sigh of relief. Han Mingshi smiled and said, yesterday was really exciting. It's all thanks to Junwei. Let's rest here for a while. The next town was only about 10 miles away from here. They could rest there for a day. If everything goes smoothly, we'll be able to reach Nanzhao's capital in 7 or 8 days at most. Sickly Scholar vetoed, let's bypass the town and head straight for Nanzhao's capital. You're not tired, but we are, Han Mingxi said discontentedly. Sickly Scholar said coldly, do you think we can complain about the hotel if we bring him along? Also, do you really think that Le Jiang won't send people after us? Han Mingxi snorted. Who's with you? You've found the person you're looking for. Go ask him where the item is. Let's part ways and go our separate ways. Haven't we suffered enough because of you yesterday? Isn't that right, Junwei? Yi Li played with the exquisite gem ornament in her hand and smiled, it's not bad. But, if we go our separate ways, will Third Master give me the reward he promised me? Sickly Scholar's eyes flashed, so it's best to go the same way, right? Otherwise, young Master Chu won't be at ease. Yi Li smiled and said, anyway, so many things have already happened. It doesn't matter if it happens a little more. If we give up halfway, wouldn't it mean that everything I did yesterday was in vain? Hearing Yi Li say this, Han Mingxi could only nod helplessly. I hope this young master won't be killed by you. Yi Li smiled and said, actually, Brother Han can return to the Central Plains as soon as possible. In any case, Brother Han isn't interested in what Third Master is looking for. Han Mingxi turned his head and flatly refused. This young master thinks it's fun to follow Junwei. Wherever Junwei goes, this young master will go. If we go together, then let's go together. When has this young master ever been afraid of anyone? The four of them decided to rest for a while. Sickly Scholar didn't want to wait any longer and dragged Master Liang to the side to torture him. Han Mingxi was also jealous of Master Liang and followed to watch. Yi Li expressed that she wasn't interested. Although Ansan was interested, he definitely wouldn't show it in front of outsiders. He also stayed by Yi Li's side to protect her. Yi Li walked to a large tree and sat down. She glanced at Han Mingxi and Sickly Scholar in the distance before taking out some odds and ends from her sleeves. Among them were 2 pieces of white paper. Yi Li took out a sharpened charcoal pen from her bag with satisfaction and began to write and draw on the paper. Ansan stood to the side and looked at his distorted and strange drawing on the paper. Didn't young master say that he didn't know these words? Did young master lie to them? Yi Li shook her head and smiled, I don't really know, but other people do. However, it's a bit difficult to remember things that you don't know. Originally, I should have remembered it yesterday, but I was worried that it would be troublesome if it was discovered. Now, I shouldn't have remembered wrongly. After speaking, Yi Li lowered her head and continued to write and draw on the paper. She said to Ansan, actually, I don't really know what this thing is either. However, I do recognize that box. The thing that I knocked off seems to be the imprint of the southern border Saintus, so this thing should be very important. Actually, she saw some more interesting things. However, she could understand those things, so she naturally remembered them well. After looking at it for a while, she threw it back to its original place. Of course, she didn't need to rush to write it out now. Ansan nodded and silently felt pity for clan leader Luo Yi, who thought that the treasure was undamaged. He definitely wouldn't know that when young master was waiting for the sky to turn dark in Snake Valley, he had already taken out the thing inside and studied it for over an hour before putting it back. In his heart, Ansan was very impressed with his master's lockpicking skills. He was thinking about when he should ask young master for advice. After a while, Yi Li slowly wrote on a piece of paper. Satisfied, he checked his memory twice before handing it over to Ansan and said, get someone to send this home as soon as possible and see what this thing is. Ansan nodded and thought for a bit before looking at Yi Li. He wanted to say something but hesitated. Yi Li looked at him with some amusement. If you have something to say, just say it. Ansan looked at the paper in his hand and asked in a small voice, we've already been out for quite some time. Since young master wants to send a letter home, shouldn't you write a letter home to let the family know that young master is safe? A letter home? Yi Li was stunned. Ever since she came out, in order to not let people discover her whereabouts, she never gave Mo Xiaoyao any information. Even the shadow guards who were scattered all over the place didn't contact her. Thinking of what Mo Xiaoyao told her, Yi Li couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Looking at the extra paper in her hand, since there was still some left, she might as well write a letter. Yi Li didn't care what sickly scholar did to Master Liang. When she saw Master Liang being dragged behind sickly scholar, she only told him to be careful not to kill him. Sickly scholar wasn't a good person with a kind heart, and this Master Liang wasn't a good person either. Hearing Yi Li's words, sickly scholar only snorted in disdain and didn't say anything. If he didn't want a person to die, then that person couldn't die even if they wanted to. But looking at sickly scholar's gloomy face, Yi Li knew in her heart that he probably didn't get what he wanted from Master Liang. After all, if this old man's mouth was that easy to pry open, he wouldn't have followed him all the way to Nanjiang. But sickly scholar wasn't completely without gain, at least he waited for that so-called complete token. Yi Li looked at it from afar. It was a piece of jade engraved with strange patterns. Because sickly scholar didn't plan on sharing it with them, Yi Li didn't ask about it. The group carefully avoided the people sent by the Luo Yi tribe to follow them, and rushed towards Nanzhou's capital without stopping. Chapter 186. Chu Jingding Manor Prince, the princess consort has sent a letter. It was already the end of April, and the sun shone warmly in the garden. Pushing open the window, the peonies in the garden were in full bloom. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the garden outside the window and vaguely remembered that he had met Li Li at this time last year. At that time, he definitely did not expect that Mo Jingqi's malicious and humiliating marriage would bring him such an extraordinary wife. Now, the people loyal to the emperor and those loyal to King Li were like fire and water in the capital. Because of the princess consort's disappearance, the doors of the Ding Manor were still closed and did not care about worldly affairs. They silently expressed their dissatisfaction with the emperor and allowed the emperor and King Li to fight openly and covertly, unlike the Ding Manor in the past that always supported the emperor at appropriate times. Bring it over. Mo Xiaoyao retracted his gaze and turned to look at Director Mo, who was standing at the door. Feng Zhiyao stood at the door, holding a thick-sealed file in his hand. He looked at Mo Xiaoyao with a smile and said, Yao, our princess consort's sister-in-law is really heartless. She left for almost 2 months and only remembered to write a letter back. Mo Xiaoyao frowned. He raised his hand and the file in Feng Zhiyao's hand was sucked over by a strong force. Where are they now? Feng Zhiyao shook his head and said, if the princess consort's whereabouts were so easy to find, they would not have disappeared until now. The shadow guard who received the letter was at the border of Luori tribe in Nanjiang, but the shadow guard did not see the person who sent the letter. Along the way, whether it was our people or other people, they did not find any trace of the princess consort. Speaking of which, it should not be difficult for the 5 of them to find out. Even if others do not know, our own people will know. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said, that proves that there were not 5 of them along the way. Also, Li Li's disguise is very good. The shadow guards who are scattered all over the country have never seen them before, so it will be difficult for them to recognize them. Moreover, they knew the approximate locations of the shadow guards, so it would be much easier for them to avoid them. Mo Xiaoyao opened the file, and a shiny object and a sealed letter slid out of the paper bag. Mo Xiaoyao took the ornament in his hand. It was a gold ornament with a sunflower pattern embedded with gemstones. Feng Zhiyao was surprised. Wang Fei actually gave you an accessory? But, could it be that something was wrong? Mo Xiaoyao looked at the gold ornament in his hand, then placed it on the table. Then, he opened the envelope and lowered his head to look at himself. His sharp eyebrows gradually furrowed. After a while, he said, find someone who is proficient in Nanjiang's language. Feng Zhiyao looked at him with surprise and said, don't you know Nanjiang's language? Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said, this isn't the same. It should be Nanjiang's ancient language. Feng Zhiyao took the letter and looked at it. The twisted and strange characters made his head swell. It looks a bit like Nanjiang's language, but it seems. I can't understand it. How does Wang Fei's sister-in-law know this kind of strange language? Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at the other letter that was clearly short, and said, she doesn't know it. She memorized these words and then wrote them out from memory. Feng Zhiyao didn't believe it. She doesn't know this kind of twisted thing. How can she memorize it from memory? Mo Xiaoyao faintly glanced at him. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose and said, "All right, we do have many people who are proficient in the current language of the southern Xinjiang, but if it's the ancient language, that seems to be something that the southern Xinjiang stopped using more than 200 years ago, right? In the past, although Nanjiang relied on the previous dynasty of the Central Plains, there were many tribes, and their language was different. It wasn't until Nanjiao was established that the current unified language of Nanjiang was implemented. Who knew which clan's language was written on this piece of paper? If it's in the capital, I'm afraid I'll have to find Elder Su. He might be able to see what this is." However, although Elder Suzhou was a person of virtue and prestige, he was still an official of the imperial court. If it really was an important secret, he would have to report it to Mo Jingqi. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and shook his head, saying, "Elder Su has never had a good impression of Nanjiang. He's not proficient in Nanjiang's language." Feng Zhiyao's eyes turned and he said with a smile, "Speaking of which, Yao, have you forgotten an important person?" Mo Xiaoyao raised his brows, calmly staring at him, warning him not to be deliberately mystifying. Feng Zhiyao giggled, saying, "Don't forget, which family our princess comes from. In the entire Da Chu state, is there any family more knowledgeable than the Shu family? If even the Shu family can't decipher this, then we can't hope to do it." Mo Xiaoyao frowned and lowered his head to look at the short family letter in his hand. He picked up the gold ornament on the table and carefully examined it. "Do you think this looks like an ornament?" Feng Zhiyao didn't understand. "Is it not?" Mo Xiaoyao felt the obvious scratches on the back of the gold ornament. This should be an ornament that was forcefully pried off from something. Also, do you remember which clan in Nanjiang had a sunflower as their emblem? Feng Zhiyao frowned and thought hard. The sunflower is also known as the sunflower. It likes warmth and is resistant to drought. Nanjiang is not very suitable for it to grow. Therefore, there doesn't seem to be any clan that uses it as their emblem. But, do you remember that there was a princess from the previous dynasty who married the leader of a tribe in Nanjiang? Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment. They were all people familiar with history books. Even if they didn't pay attention to these things, the previous dynasty and Da Chu state were so close, so they naturally had some impression. "It was the Chaoyang princess of the previous dynasty?" Feng Zhiyao said with a smile, "Yes, the rumored name of this princess had the character Kuei. Then, if Li brought this out, it means that it is not a normal antique. Does this have something to do with the previous dynasty's princess? The descendant of the previous dynasty's princess. When the previous dynasty fell, this princess had already been married for 200 years, right? Who knows?" Feng Zhiyao shook his head. Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment before saying, "Send someone to secretly send a copy of this seal to Yunju. Also, if the shadow guard in Nanjiang finds Li, immediately tell her not to worry about this matter." Feng Zhiyao put away the letter with some surprise and said, "Wang Fei has clearly done well. If there is a chance to continue investigating, she should know many secrets of Nanjiang. Why not? We can send people to help Wang Fei." Mo Xiaoyao stared at the gold ornament in his hand and said in a low voice, "I don't know why, but I feel that there is a great secret hidden in that piece of paper. It's just that we don't have a clue yet. Li doesn't know anything. It is very dangerous to rashly investigate." Feng Zhiyao shrugged helplessly. "All right, everything will be done according to Prince's orders." Feng Zhiyao took the item and left. Only Mo Xiaoyao was left in the room. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to look at the letter in his hand again. Other than a simple explanation of what happened after entering Nanjiang, there was only a short sentence of "Don't miss me." Gently stroking the letter in his hand, Mo Xiaoyao's lips curved into a bitter smile. Yi Li and the other three rushed all the way and arrived at Nanzhao's capital in less than 7 days. Once they reached the capital, Sickly Scholar took Master Liang and left without hesitation. Han Mingxi was so angry that he couldn't help but curse. What does he mean? Is he going to burn the bridge after crossing the river? Yi Li glanced at him and said with a smile, "Even if he burns the bridge after crossing the river, what can you do?" The Tianyi Pavilion had people in Nanzhao, and so did the Yangwang Chamber. The Tianyi Pavilion was an intelligence organization, and the Yangwang Chamber was an assassination organization. So what if they were dissatisfied? No one could do anything to sickly scholar. Han Mingxi crossed his arms and looked at her. Didn't you want some medicine to prolong life or revive the dead? If you let him go just like that, do you think he will obediently deliver it to you? Chapter 187. Yi Li smiled. Even if you insist on following him, he won't give it to you obediently. If he doesn't give it to me, won't he go find it himself? She didn't come to Nanjiang for sickly scholar and his Bai Luo flower. She couldn't follow him all the time. But this kind of thing didn't necessarily have to be done by herself. As soon as they entered Nanzhao's capital, Han Mingxi took Yi Li to the best restaurant in Nanzhao's capital to reward himself for his hard work these days. After ordering a table full of Nanjiang food, he went back to his room to rest after eating heartily. He also said that unless the restaurant caught fire, no one was allowed to disturb him for 2 days. Yi Li and Ansan were left speechless as they stared at the swaying figure going upstairs. Young Master Han really isn't like young Master Mingyu. Ansan sighed. Yi Li smiled at him. Do you really think he went upstairs to sleep? I bet he can sleep until midnight tonight at most. And it was already evening. Ansan frowned and didn't speak. Yi Li waved her fan in a good mood. Let's go out for a stroll and see Nanzhao's night scenery. Compared to the solemn and grand Chu capital, Nanzhao's capital was much smaller. It also wasn't as prosperous as Chu capital. Everyone was wearing Nanjiang's clothing. Yi Li and Ansan were wearing the clothing of the Central Plains and had an extraordinary bearing. Naturally, they were very eye-catching. However, Yi Li didn't have any interest in Nanjiang's clothing. She didn't plan on changing her attire if it wasn't necessary. Young Master. A surprised exclamation came from behind. Yi Li and Ansan turned at the same time to see an who hadn't been seen for a long time. Yi Li was a bit surprised. She didn't plan on going to find her big brother as soon as she arrived in Nanzhao. Why are you here? Big brother is also here? An face was tired. He said hoarsely, this subordinate has failed young master. Young Master Shu. Young Master Shu has disappeared. What? Yi Li was shocked. When did this happen? An said in a low voice, it's been more than half a month. 2 days before this subordinate arrived at the capital of Nanzhao, young Master Shu had already disappeared. It's been so many days. Who knows about this? Yi Li asked with a frown. An said in a low voice, it is said that before young Master Qing Chen left, he told him to come back in 5 days, so at first no one cared. On the morning of the 6th day, young Master Qing Chen was still nowhere to be seen. Only then did she realize that something was wrong. My subordinates and the shadow guard of Nanjiang also secretly investigated, but there was no news. A few days ago, I already had someone send the news back to the capital. It's just that young master has been concealing his whereabouts all this time, so we didn't receive the news. Yi Li's face darkened. She was worried about Shu Qingchen's safety. Who was Big Brother with before he disappeared? It's the Nanjiang King's crown princess, aren't she? She's Princess Xia's elder sister and the next Nanzhao King. She and young Master Qing Chen are friends. After young Master Qing Chen came to southern border, he has been staying in the princess residence. An said. Yi Li nodded and ordered, get someone to send the information about Nanzhao's capital over as soon as possible. Also, I want to see Princess Anshi. An nodded and said, I understand. But, under what name do you plan to meet the crown princess? Even though Nanzhao was a small country, the crown princess and the princess were not people that ordinary people could meet. Yi Li's eyes turned and she said with a smile, Yunzhou's Chu family's third missy, Chu Liuyun. Young Master Qing Chen's fiancé. And An's face stiffened, and they had a headache. Is the princess consort ruining my reputation or young Master Qing Chen's reputation? Yi Li's expression was normal as she looked at the two stiff faces with a smile. What else can I do? Go to find cousin as princess consort Ding? Okay, you will follow me for this period of time. Secretly investigate Nanzhao and Big Brother's matters. Also, if Han Mingxi comes to find me. An continued, I understand. I won't let young Master Han get suspicious. That's good. You don't have to pay too much attention to him. Just try not to let him get close to me. We'll go back first. And get ready. We'll visit Princess Anchi tomorrow morning. Yes. The next morning, Yi Li, who had been reading dossiers the whole night, opened the door after hearing a soft knock on the door. An looked at the woman standing at the door with a smile and couldn't help but be dazed. He had gotten used to the princess consort's male disguise and almost forgot that the princess consort was still a teenage girl. Speaking of which, it had been less than 2 months since they left the capital, but she had left a deeper impression than the previous year. Looking at the woman in front of him now, she was wearing a light yellow robe embroidered with green plum blossoms. Her hair was tied up in a small bun, and there was an exquisite and elegant 4-butterfly silver buyao on the bun. Her forehead was covered by thin bangs, which made her look even more delicate and delicate. The slender silver butterflies in her hair trembled slightly, making the girl look more charming and naughty. She was not very similar to the quiet and elegant princess consort of King Ding's mansion in the capital. An had to admit that the princess consort's disguise skills were not something normal people could match. Zhuojing. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and looked at the shadow guard in front of her who was thinking about something. An came back to his senses and said with a calm expression, "Young Miss was right. Han Gongzi left the inn last night and hasn't returned yet. Mrs. Now." Yi Li waved her hand and said with a smile, "It's been hard on you. Go back to your room and rest. I'll go down by myself." Yes. Yi Li went downstairs in a good mood. An was waiting for her in the hall downstairs. Last night, she had come in with an and opened 2 other rooms. Coincidentally, an and an rooms were sandwiched between her 2 rooms, so no one had discovered that the 2 rooms belonged to the same person. Now, they just had to check out and leave together. If Princess Anchi was interested, she would find out that they entered the city last night and stayed in this inn for 1 night. That was all. She took an out of the inn and the 2 headed for Princess Anchi's Fu that was not far from the Nanjiao Palace. They waited outside the Princess Fu for a long time before the person who went to report came out to invite them in. Nanjiao's architecture was very different from the Central Plains, but the capital city was mostly the same. However, the Princess Fu was much smaller than the enormous Ding Wang Fu. It was about the same size as the Yi family's Fu. The architecture of the Central Plains had many of the characteristics of Nanjiang, giving people a strange feeling. The 2 were invited to the hall. When they came in, they saw a tall woman wearing blue embroidered clothing sitting in the hall. The woman's clothing was not the usual straight and narrow sleeves, but clean and tidy sleeves. The embroidery on the cuffs and the hem were embroidered with the seal of the Nanjiao Imperial House. She was wearing a silver belt that accentuated her slim figure, making her look even more agile and valiant. Compared to her sister Princess Xixia, the #1 beauty of Nanjiao, she wasn't beautiful enough. However, her sparkling eyes made her look even more eye-catching. Seeing Yi Li come in, Princess Anchi's gaze carried a trace of inquiry. Yi Li frowned and raised her small face proudly. "Why didn't you invite us to sit down?" Chapter 188. Princess Anchi frowned. She looked at Yi Li and said, "Please take a seat." "How should I address you?" Yi Li said, "I'm Chu Liuyun. I'm here to look for Brother Qing Chen." "Brother Qing Chen?" Princess Anchi's eyes darkened. She shook her head and said, "Sorry, I don't know who Brother Qing Chen is." "You're lying." Yi Li glared at her unhappily and reprimanded. "Brother Qing Chen said that he came to Nanjiang to travel and visit his friends." "Brother Qing Chen said that you're his friend. Why didn't he come here? Did you hide Big Brother Qing Chen?" Princess Anchi frowned even more. She looked at the young girl's tearful face and asked, "How are you related to young Master Qing Chen?" I'm his fiancé." "Boo-hoo. Brother Qing Chen said that he would come back in 3 months and marry me. But now, boo-hoo, he's been out for a long time, but there's no letter. Auntie Shu is so worried. Boo-hoo. He must not want Liuyun anymore. If I can't find Brother Qing Chen, I don't want to live anymore." Princess Anchi's eyes darkened. She stared at the crying girl suspiciously and said, You're young Master Qingchen's fiancé? Why haven't I heard him mention you before? Yi Li looked up and looked at her bitterly. We girls from the Central Plains care about our reputation. How could Brother Qingchen mention me in front of his friends? Here, this is the token that Brother Qingchen gave me last year. If you're really his friend, you should have seen it before. He said that he's been wearing it for many years. It's all thanks to this jade that he's been safe all these years. Princess Anshi looked at Yi Li with a complicated expression. She was a little shaken. She didn't know if the jade belonged to Shu Qingchen, but the old network on the jade pendant was indeed the style and color that Shu Qingchen usually used. Even the thread was the same as Shu Qingchen's. I'm sorry, Miss Chu. I was rude just now. It's a tough journey from the Central Plains to Nanjiang. Why are you in Nanzhao's capital? Asked Princess Anshi softly as she returned the jade pendant to her. Yi Li bit her lip and looked at Princess Anshi stubbornly. Brother Qingchen won't come for a long time. My second sister said that Brother Qingchen doesn't want me anymore. I want to find him and ask him clearly. If he really doesn't want me anymore, I'll die. An stood to the side, watching his master play the role of a young girl who ran away from home for love to perfection. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Princess Anshi was obviously having a headache dealing with such a stubborn and willful little girl. She hesitated for a moment before saying, Young Master Qingchen was indeed a guest at my humble abode a few days ago, but he's gone now. Why don't I send someone to escort Miss Chu back to the Central Plains first? If I see young Master Qingchen, I will ask him to write a letter to Miss Chu as soon as possible. What do you think? Yi Li stared at Princess Anshi in a daze. After a long while, she burst into tears. She wiped her tears and said, I ran out with the guards. If I couldn't find Brother Qingchen, my father would break my legs. Boo-hoo. I don't want to go back. I want to find Brother Qingchen. Princess Anshi touched her forehead. Okay. Miss Chu, how about this? You stay in my mansion for a while. When young Master Qingchen comes back, you can go back together, okay? Hearing this, Yi Li immediately smiled through her tears. Thank you, Sister Princess. You're so kind. Princess Anshi summoned a maid and led Yi Li to the guest room to rest. After the maid left, Yi Li looked at an guiltily and asked, Do you think Princess Anshi can become my sister-in-law? It would be troublesome if she ruined her elder brother's marriage because of this. She didn't want to become the third party in a melodramatic plot. An shook his head with a serious expression. Impossible. Although the Shu family doesn't discriminate against the alien race, the Shu family hasn't married anyone of the alien race for hundreds of years. Moreover, Princess Anshi is the crown princess of the southern frontier. Her status is noble. The Shu family can't possibly allow the next head of the Shu family to marry into the southern frontier. More importantly, given young Master Qingchen's personality, if he was truly interested in Princess Anshi, he definitely wouldn't call her a friend. Yi Li tilted her head in thought. What an said made sense. If she ruined her elder brother's marriage because of this, it would be a grave sin. However, she felt that this Princess Anshi wasn't bad. She had seen so many princesses. Other than Princess Changle, who was still a young girl, this Princess Anshi seemed the most reliable. If it were any other princesses, who knew how they would deal with her upon hearing that she was the fiancée of their sweetheart. She was indeed worthy of being her elder brother's friend. Miss, what are your plans? An asked. Yi Li smiled. If I stay in the princess's residence, won't I be able to inquire about my elder brother? An replied, but if you stay in the princess's residence, it will be inconvenient to enter and leave. Mrs. Movements will also be restricted. Yi Li shook her head and smiled. Princess Anshi wouldn't go so far as to put her friend's fiancé under house arrest, would she? Right now, it is more important to find out my elder brother's whereabouts. After all, even after so many days, the Shadow Guard still hasn't been able to figure out where my elder brother ended up. An lowered his head. Ashamed, he said, it is this subordinate's dereliction of duty. Yi Li waved her hand and smiled. How can I blame you? If everything could be made clear, then there would be no such thing as a secret in this world. I only hope that my elder brother is safe and sound. Thinking of Shu Qingchen, whose whereabouts were unknown, Yi Li could not hide the worry in her heart. Princess Anchi's residence was not large. Perhaps it was because the southern border was not strict with men and women, but Shu Qingchen's room was in the same courtyard as Yi Li's. Yi Li did not conceal her whereabouts. Directly asking for the location of Shu Qingchen's room, she went over. Pushing open the door, she saw that the room was very clean. Although Shu Qingchen had been gone for many days, this room was still cleaned every day. Shu Qingchen's belongings were all in the room. Yi Li looked carefully. Shu Qingchen's clothes, jade pendant, folding fan, and the travel notes that he carried with him when he was bored were all in a bundle in the cabinet. On one side of the desk, there was a white porcelain tea set with blue and white flowers that Shu Qingchen liked. Some books, ink, paper, and inkstone were neatly arranged in the middle of the book. Obviously, Shu Qingchen had lived here for a long time. Yi Li went to the desk and sat down. She picked up a book and began to read. "Miss Chu, why are you here?" Princess Anchi's voice sounded at the door. Yi Li looked up and saw her standing at the door, frowning and looking at her. Yi Li quickly got up and looked at her uneasily. She said, "Sorry, I heard that brother Qingchen used to live here, so I wanted to come and have a look. I just wanted to find a few books to read." Princess Anchi came over. Looking at the books on the table, her eyes were warm. She asked, "You also like to read?" Yi Li lowered her eyes and nodded shyly. She said, "Brother Qingchen is the most talented person in the world. I want to read more books." Princess Anchi nodded and said, "Young Master Qingchen also likes to read. When he has nothing to do, he always has a book with him. I only know the characters of the Central Plains. As for the books, I don't understand them." Yi Li put down the book in her hand and said in a low voice, "I heard Brother Qingchen mention you, Princess. You are the Crown Princess of Nanjiang. What you care about is important matters. It's natural that you are not interested in these poems and articles." Princess Anchi smiled generously and said, "I learned the characters of the Central Plains late. It's good enough that I can understand them. Even if I am interested, I can't understand them. Since Miss Chu likes the books in the study, you can read them. These were all bought by young Master Qingchen. They are useless here." Chapter 189. Yi Li nodded. "Thank you, Your Highness." "Your Highness." Yi Li looked at Princess Anchi and hesitated. Princess Anchi raised her eyebrows and motioned for her to continue. Yi Li asked softly, "I want to find Brother Qingchen as soon as possible. He hasn't written to every family for a long time. Can you tell me where he said he was going when he left? So I can take the guards with me to find him." Princess Anchi looked at her for a long time and frowned. "It's not that I don't want to tell you where he is, but I'm looking for him too." Yi Li guessed happily. Then, has he left Nanjiang and returned to the Central Plains? Princess Anchi shook her head. "There are still many things to do in Nanjiang. He won't leave so easily. Besides, if he really left, he would have said goodbye to me. He should have at least left a message. Then will he be in danger?" Princess Anchi looked at her awkwardly. After a long time, she shook her head. "I don't think so. Master Qingchen is very smart. He'll be able to deal with anything. But Brother Qingchen doesn't know martial arts. He can't even beat Lin Han, who is by my side," Yi Li shouted anxiously. Princess Anchi comforted her softly. "Trust me. He'll be fine. I promise." Yi Li's eyes flickered and she looked up at her with hope. "Really? You promise?" Princess Anchi nodded heavily. "As the Princess of Nanjiao, I promise that he'll be fine. You just have to wait in the mansion. You'll see Master Qingchen soon." Yi Li nodded. "Okay, I believe you, Your Highness. But I'm going to find Brother Qingchen." Princess Anchi looked at her helplessly. "You can only stay in the capital. You can't run around. If Master Qingchen comes back and can't find you..." "I know. Thank you, Your Highness." Outside the door of the guest courtyard, the smile on Princess Anchi's face gradually faded. As he walked towards his courtyard, he turned around and asked the person following behind him, Have you investigated Miss Chu's side? The man beside her replied in a low voice, Your Highness, we've checked. Miss Chu only entered the city yesterday when it was almost dark. After entering the city, they stayed at the most famous inn in the capital. This morning, after checking out of the hotel, he asked around for the location of the princess residence and came straight here. However, she didn't use Chu Liuyun's identity. Instead, she used Xu Yun and Lin Han. Princess Anshi nodded. It's not too much to use an alias when you're outside. Anything else? The man shook his head and said, There's nothing else. If we want to verify Miss Chu's identity, I'm afraid we'll have to send someone to the Da Chu state. It'll take at least a month for a round trip. Princess Anshi shook her head. I'm afraid we don't have the time. She must know Qing Chen, and she must be very familiar with him. It was more important to find Qing Chen as soon as possible. Whether it was him or not would be clear once they found him. Just send someone to keep an eye on them during this time. Yes. Anything else? The man hesitated for a moment and said, When we went to check on Miss Chu, we found that 3 people from the Central Plains came to the inn yesterday. Their names were nothing special, but they might not be their real names. Does it have anything to do with Miss Chu? It doesn't seem like it. They arrived 4 hours earlier than Miss Chu, and one of them went back to his room to rest after eating. The other 2 went out and came back after Miss Chu checked in. We haven't seen them yet. Then, don't bother about them first. It's normal for people from the Central Plains to enter and leave the city from time to time. This is the responsibility of the capital's Guard General. It'll be troublesome if we interfere too much. Yes. Your Highness, the king wants to see you. Got it. I'll go to the palace immediately. Yi Li brought a poetry book back to her room and sat down to read it peacefully. Princess Anshi could become Nanzhao's crown princess because she wasn't a brainless princess. At least, the people she sent to keep an eye on her knew their limits and wouldn't let the guests feel offended. Yi Li couldn't be bothered to say anything more. If Princess Anshi really believed her completely, then she would have to doubt the crown princess's brain. Princess Anshi left the residence. An came in and said in a low voice. Yi Li nodded and said softly, That princess isn't simple. Don't get too close to her, lest you get misunderstood. An frowned and looked outside the door. She doesn't believe us at all. Isn't it completely useless for us to stay here and make it difficult for us to escape? Yi Li shook her head. Princess Anshi must know where Big Brother went. Even if she can't find Big Brother now, she clearly isn't worried about Big Brother's safety. What has Big Brother been doing since he entered Nanzhao? Can you find out? An nodded. This subordinate will give it to you before tomorrow. Yi Li nodded and frowned as she stared at the book in her hand. Her mind had already flown far away. Big Brother clearly hadn't been taken away. He had gone somewhere of his own accord. But he didn't return at the time he agreed with Princess Anshi. Big Brother didn't have any interests or enemies in Nanzhao, so he could only have gone for Princess Anshi. Even so, according to Big Brother's meticulous nature as inherited from eldest uncle, he shouldn't have left behind no clues. The clues, where were they? She threw a piece of paper on the table. Yi Li took out her usual charcoal pen and quickly wrote and drew on the paper. In his mind, he kept thinking about all kinds of complicated information about Nanjiang that the secret guard had sent over last night. He quickly drew a chart of the distribution of forces in Nanjiang on the paper, and analyzed the relationship between the various forces in the capital of Nanzhao. After a while, a large piece of paper was filled with all kinds of simple symbols and strange characters. An looked strangely at the things he couldn't understand and didn't ask. Yi Li Ge put down the pen and looked at herself on the paper, stunned. It wasn't that she deliberately wanted to guard against anyone. In fact, what was written on this paper wasn't a secret. It was just that she had re-summarized the information she saw last night. Looking at the paper that was fluently mixed with at least 4 languages, Yi Li couldn't help but smile helplessly in her heart. In fact, she had been missing her previous life. She could be a quiet and perfect princess, but she didn't like it. So after leaving the capital, she deliberately avoided Mo Xiuyao's protection and chose to travel in a dangerous way. Putting aside the chaotic thoughts in her mind, Yi Li stared at the paper on the table for a long time. Then she frowned and asked, "Why is there no news about the Saintess of Nanjiang?" The clear drawings in front of her showed that they had very little information about the Saintess of Nanjiang, an important person in Nanjiang. Even if there was, it was only a few words. It was the most basic information. It was almost the same as what she knew in the capital. Only her age, name, and even appearance weren't clear. If the Saintess of Nanjiang was fighting with the crown princess to usurp power, there wouldn't be so little information. Chapter 190. Immerse said, "The Saintess of Nanjiang is known as the patron saint of Nanjiang. She is enshrined in the Saintess Hall 5 li outside of Nanjiao City. Except for major events and festivals, the Saintess will not leave the Saintess Hall. Usually, only the 36 maids chosen to serve the Saintess can approach the Saintess. The current Saintess, Xu Manlin, succeeded at the age of 15. In the past 8 years, she has left the temple 10 times, but each time she wore a mask. It is said that in the entire Nanjiao, except for the previous Saintess who has entered the Holy Land of Nanjiang, no one knows what she looks like." Yi Li shook her head. "That is impossible. The current Saintess does not have the right to teach the next Saintess. Then who taught the Saintess? Who raised her when she was young? Who are her parents? And, if no one has seen the Saintess' true face, then, who can be sure that the person under the mask is the real Saintess of Nanjiang?" This. Immerse frowned with some hesitation. Yi Li picked up a pen and wrote a few lines on the paper. "Carefully investigate the Nanjiao royal family and the Saintess of Nanjiang. Don't miss any details." Immerse replied, "Yes, this subordinate will immediately send people to do it." "Miss suspects, the Saintess of Nanjiang." Yi Li played with the charcoal pen in her hand and smiled. If the Saintess of Nanjiang really doesn't leave the temple, how could she hook up with Li Wang? A few years ago, when Li Wang went to Nanjiang, the Saintess of Nanjiang did not appear. Then, Immerse's eyes lit up. They have met in private. The alliance with Nanjiang is so important that it is impossible for Li Wang to send someone to discuss it. Also, it is not easy to see the Saintess of Nanjiang. Yi Li nodded and leaned back in her chair, thinking, "Saintess, this identity is really strange." Suddenly, a girl with an unknown identity, origin, and ability is pushed to one of the most respected positions in the entire Nanjiang. Are the people of Nanjiang too easily trusting? Immerse shook his head and shrugged. If a random person in our Chu state was named the crown prince, even the emperor's golden mouth and jade words wouldn't be able to convince the public. The Saintess system in Nanjiang seems to be as long as the history of the Nanjiao kingdom. It wasn't that long. Before Nanjiao was established, each tribe governed their own affairs. There was no such thing as a holy maiden. Indeed, after Nanjiao was founded, the state preceptor at that time, who was also the priest of the Nanjiao royal family, chose the first holy maiden. Immerse lowered his head and recalled. Yi Li raised an eyebrow. It sounds like the imperial tutor and the holy maiden have similar roles. So after the holy maiden appeared, Nanjiao no longer had the title of imperial tutor. Immerse nodded and pondered for a moment before saying, "The imperial tutor's actions aren't as strict as the holy maiden's. The responsibilities that need to be fulfilled are more or less the same. However, in the hearts of the southern border people, the holy maiden is clearly more worthy of worship than the state preceptor. Compared to an old man who likes to wander around, most people prefer a mysterious and beautiful girl," Yi Li agreed. In the morning, after eating the breakfast brought by the maid, Yi Li prepared to go out with Immerse. But at the door, she met Princess Anshi, who was also about to go out. "Miss Chu, are you going out?" Yi Li greeted her with an expectant and nervous smile. "Sister Princess, is there any news of brother Qingchen?" Princess Anshi shook her head regretfully. "Apologies, Miss Chu. There's no news of Master Qingchen yet." Yi Li lowered her head in disappointment. She said in a low voice, "It's okay, brother Qingchen will be fine. Lin Han and I will also go out to find brother Qingchen. We'll definitely find him soon. Miss Chu is new to Nanjiao and unfamiliar with the place. Where do you want to find him?" Yi Li helplessly counted with her fingers. she said in a low voice. I'll look around. Maybe I'll find him. Princess Anchi couldn't help but smile. If Miss Chu feels bored, you can walk around the capital. If there's any place you want to go, you can ask the people in the residence to guide you. But there are many dangerous places in Nanjiang. Miss Chu, please don't go alone. Don't let Master Qing Chen worry. Yi Li nodded. I know. Thank you, Sister Princess. You'll find Brother Qing Chen soon, right? Or I'll write to Uncle Shu. Brother Qing Chen said that Uncle Shu is the smartest person in the world. He'll definitely find Brother Qing Chen. Mr. Hong Yu? Princess Anchi asked softly, startled. Yi Li nodded heavily. She said with a smile, Sister Princess also knows Uncle Shu? Did Brother Qing Chen tell you? Princess Anchi nodded slightly. She said with a smile, Don't worry, Miss Chu. I promise I'll find Master Qing Chen soon. The road to Nanjiang is difficult. Don't let Mr. Hong Yu worry. Otherwise, won't young Master Qing Chen feel uneasy when he finds out? Yi Li blinked. She looked at Princess Anchi in confusion. After a while, she nodded and said, Sister Princess is right. After watching Princess Anchi leave, Yi Li followed her with a smile. Tell someone to follow Princess Anchi. Yes. In the inn, Han Mingxi walked down from the lobby with a satisfied expression as if she had just woken up. Her languid and elegant demeanor that was different from the people of the southern border immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the inn. Han Mingxi didn't care about other people looking at him. He lazily walked down the stairs and asked the waiter, Have you seen the two masters with me? The waiter felt dizzy. He quickly said, Master, the two masters left early this morning. By the way, there is a letter for Master. The waiter ran to the counter and took the letter from the innkeeper. He handed it to Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi raised her eyebrows. She took the letter and glanced at it. She couldn't help but frown. Zhun Wei is really too mean. How can he leave me behind and run away? H. There is no one in this world that I can't find. He crumpled the letter into a ball and hesitantly put it in his sleeve. He walked out angrily, leaving the guests in the inn who hadn't come to their senses. At this time, in a restaurant owned by the great Chu people opposite the inn, Yi Li, dressed in men's clothing, was leisurely sitting by the window drinking tea. The person beside her had changed from an to an san. Looking out of the window, he happened to see Han Mingxi, who was grumbling resentfully, walking out from inside. Yi Li was amused as she watched Han Mingxi walk into the crowd and gradually disappear. She asked, What did Han Mingxi do yesterday? And San said in a deep voice, Master Han went out in the middle of the night 2 days ago. He didn't come back until 10 past midnight. He should have gone to the Tianyi Pavilion's stronghold in Nanjiao. We and the Tianyi Pavilion have never offended each other. Master, do you need to investigate? Yi Li shook her head and said, No need. It's fine as long as he doesn't hinder us. Pay attention to the news from Ansai. Don't let Han Mingyu come to find us without us knowing. And San nodded. Strictly speaking, Master didn't scheme against the Tianyi Pavilion. It was Master Han who followed us to Nanjiang. The Tianyi Pavilion's master shouldn't make trouble for us. That's not necessarily true. Does the Tianyi Pavilion send news regularly? Yi Li asked. Chapter 191. Yes, I've compared the information I got from the Tianyi Pavilion with our own information. There's not much difference, and San replied. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction. That's good. If there's someone who can deceive the Shadow Guard and the Tianyi Pavilion at the same time, then it wouldn't be an injustice for us to be fooled. When we return, ask the Tianyi Pavilion for information on the Saintess of Nanjiang. I told Han Mingxi that I want the hidden Luo flower. If we ask for information on the Saintess of Nanjiang now, Han Mingxi won't be suspicious. Yes. Young Master, there's news on Sickly Scholar's side. I'm afraid Master Liang won't be able to hold on any longer. Are you? Yi Li frowned in annoyance. She didn't expect to receive news of her brother's disappearance as soon as she arrived in Nanjiao. As a result, not only could she not get any advice or help from Shu Qingchen, She also had to find Shu Qingchen's whereabouts in the shortest amount of time possible. This made her a little busy, but she couldn't ignore Sickly Scholar. Master Liang isn't a martial artist after all. Besides, with Sickly Scholar's methods, I'm afraid even a martial artist won't be able to hold on for long. Before, Sickly Scholar was afraid that he wouldn't have any clues if he killed Master Liang. Now that the token was in his hands, even if Master Liang didn't say anything, he could always find some clues if he put in some effort. And without the token, Master Liang wouldn't be able to explain himself. Where are they? Outside the city. Yi Li thought for a moment and said, "It's more important to find my brother first. Let the Shadow Guard keep an eye on them. If there's no other choice, help the people of the Luori tribe rescue Master Liang first. We can't let him tell Sickly Scholar the way to obtain the hidden Luo flower. At least not before we have the time. If we can't, we can only snatch it. If we can't, we'll destroy the hidden Luo flower. We can't let Sickly Scholar get it." And San said hesitantly, "The hidden Luo flower might be able to cure the prince's illness. If it's destroyed, that's why we have to try our best to get it. But if we really can't get it, we can't let Sickly Scholar get it. Who do you think the first person he'll deal with?" Yi Li asked with a smile. "Prince. What's the reason for this? He's going to Nanjiang alone and didn't use the power of the Yangwang chamber. Why did he go to Nanjiang alone this time? He went alone to Nanjiang. And didn't use Yangwang chambers. Why he went to? Is it for him to send him alone? Did he go alone to go? The other two heads of the King of Hell's pavilion must have disagreed. Back then, Sickly Scholar had almost lost his life due to his serious injuries. Even now, he was barely hanging on. How could he not hate him? However, Yama's pavilion and Ding King's palace made an agreement to never offend each other. So he can only rely on himself. Thinking of Sickly Scholar's resentful eyes when he mentioned the hidden Luo underworld, Yi Li couldn't help but shudder. Because of this, the thought of killing Sickly Scholar first popped up in his mind. However, this thought only flashed through his mind. Whether it was because of Sickly Scholar's identity or other reasons, she couldn't kill him now. At least, he couldn't die in the hands of Princess Consort Ding. This subordinate understands. I will never let Sickly Scholar get the hidden Luo flower. Somewhere in Nanjiao, in a secret palace, there were marble floors and pillars carved with exquisite patterns, exquisite gold ornaments and utensils inlaid with gems of various colors, and countless luminous pearls replacing the light formed by candles. Nanjiang's most precious hibiscus muslin was wrapped in layers. Behind the muslin, an elegant man in white was sitting quietly reading a book. Under the soft light of the luminous pearls, the man's perfect side face was suffused with a faint luster, and his whole person seemed more quiet and peaceful. The heavy stone door was pushed open from the outside, and a slender and graceful woman slowly walked in. Different from the traditional Nanjiang costume, the woman wore a bright yellow wide robe with phoenix patterns, and the hem of the robe dragged on the ground. Her black hair was casually tied up, decorated with gorgeous multicolored gems, and a delicate golden mask covered her entire face. The delicate mask had a strange charm, making the eyes under the mask even more dazzling. The woman walked gracefully, looked at the man in white, and whispered with a smile, "Young Master Qingchen, you really don't want to look at me? As long as you nod, I will take off my mask and let you see." Shu Qingchen put down the book in his hand, sighed softly, looked up and asked, Are you more beautiful than those on the Chu capital beauty map?" This seemed to be the first time Shu Qingchen responded to this question. The woman was a little surprised. "You like the women of Da Chu state? I have also heard of the Chu capital beauty map. Which one do you like more? Is it the number one beauty of Da Chu state, Suzuidi? She seems to have died." Shu Qingchen smiled faintly. "Suzuidi is indeed a good beauty. If you are not as beautiful as her, then don't look at her. You." A trace of anger flashed in the woman's eyes, but she quickly calmed down, and said with a smile, "Young Master Qingchen is too picky. As far as I know, your little fiancée is indeed good-looking, but she doesn't seem to have reached the level of absolute beauty." Shu Qingchen lowered his eyes, hiding the strange look in his eyes. The woman took Shu Qingchen's silence, and said with a snort, "Speaking of which, that Miss Chu is indeed deeply in love with young master. She actually came all the way to Nanjiang with only one guard. Miss Chu really doesn't seem like a woman of the Central Plains. Where is she? Shu Qingchen asked. Hihi, yesterday she came to our Crown Princess Anxi's residence with great fanfare. Since Princess Anxi and young master are good friends, I'm sure she will take good care of young master's fiancé. The woman covered her mouth with a smile. Young master Qingchen, are you really not going to consider my proposal? After this is done, you and I can share the world. Shu Qingchen's expression was calm, and he said softly, if this one guesses correctly, 3 years ago, Miss also made a promise to share the world with Da Chu states Prince Li. The woman flicked her sleeve disdainfully and said with a smile, Mo Jingli? How can he compare to young master? No. I believe that in this world, besides Prince Ding, there is no one who can compare to young master. Only. Prince Ding is already crippled. Young master is the most perfect man in this world, and the most compatible man with me. Shu Qingchen shook his head. I am truly sorry. The Shu family has a rule of marriage. The descendants of the Shu family are not allowed to covet beauty, wealth, or power. This one can only marry one person in this life. Miss, it is useless to keep me locked up like this. Nanzhao's capital is not big, it is only a matter of time before someone finds this place. The woman half leaned on a marble pillar and giggled, aren't you afraid that I will kill you? In this half year, how many bad ideas have you come up with for Anxi? How many things have you ruined for me? Don't you like women from the Central Plains? Am I not more like a woman from the Central Plains than Anxi? Shu Qingchen shook his head and lowered his head to continue reading, saying, if you wanted to kill me, you would have done so long ago. Also, what good would it do you to kill me? That's right. The woman sighed helplessly, killing you is really troublesome. The Shu family of the Central Plains, and maybe even the Ding Crown Prince's residence will make trouble for me. Also, our Crown Princess will definitely fight me to the death. But, hehe, although I can't kill you, I can lock you up here. That way, you can't ruin my business. Without you, it won't be long before Anxi, that arrogant and annoying woman, dies a horrible death. Of course, there is also your cute fiancé. Chapter 192. You're not allowed to touch her. Shu Qingchen seemed to be enraged and warned her coldly. Hey, you really care about her? The woman looked at Shu Qingchen strangely. Why would you like a little girl who hasn't grown up yet? Shu Qingchen said indifferently, as long as she's my fiancé, I'll naturally care. The woman stared at her. You mean no matter what kind of person she is, as long as she's your fiancé, you'll care about her? Shu Qingchen smiled. Isn't that natural? Since she's my future wife, if I don't care about her, who else would I care about? You. Fine, I'll show you what I'm capable of. The woman sneered and glared hatefully at Shu Qingchen before leaving in a huff. Hearing the heavy stone door close again, Shu Qingchen slowly put down the book in her hand. Her handsome eyes drooped. Fiancé. Miss Chu. Late at night, Princess Anxi's residence was quiet. Only the light in the study was still faintly lit. Princess Anxi's handsome face showed a trace of tiredness as she frowned at the man in front of her. Is there still no news from Qingchen? The man shook his head and said in a low voice, no. Princess Anxi said anxiously, what's the matter? Does she still not believe that we really think Qingchen is missing? The man nodded, it's very likely. Although we've sent people to look for young Master Qingchen, it's very likely that she still thinks we're working together with young Master Qingchen to put on a show for her. I hope nothing bad happened to Qingchen. Princess Anxi closed her eyes tiredly and rubbed her aching forehead. We've spent so much effort and finally made the situation better. If we fail now, I'm afraid. Father. The man frowned. His Majesty still doesn't believe the princess. Princess Anxi smiled bitterly. Father is just over 40 years old and is in the prime of his life. Even if he believes us, he won't support us. He needs another force to suppress me, the Crown Princess. If it wasn't for Father's secret favoritism, they wouldn't have failed again and again in the past 6 months. Every time they were about to catch that person's tail, she would escape. Now even the commander's seal is in her hands. If we can't get the commander's seal back, nothing we do will be of any use. Princess Anchi didn't understand why her wise father would side with that woman. But he couldn't just stand by and watch as she tried to do something bad to Nanjiao. This was her responsibility as the princess of Nanjiao and the crown princess. Can you find out where young Master Qingchen is? Princess Anchi asked. If you can't find out, then ask Qingchen to withdraw first. This is Nanjiao's own matter. We cannot implicate him. The man shook his head and said, I'm afraid not. Although we receive news from young Master Qingchen from time to time, it is young Master Qingchen who gets in touch with us. We have no idea where young Master Qingchen is. Damn it. Princess Anchi cursed. Assassin. A shout came from outside the courtyard. Princess Anchi stood up abruptly. The man beside her pulled out his sword and opened the door. But soon he came back and said with a frown, they are going to the guest courtyard. Princess Anchi said, there is only Miss Chu in the guest courtyard. Why would the assassin want to find her? Let's go and have a look. Then she rushed out of the door and went to the guest courtyard. The man quickly closed the door and followed her out. The study was quiet again. The window in the corner moved slightly. Then it was pushed open. A black figure quickly flipped in. A pair of clear and beautiful eyes were revealed under the black mask. The black-clothed person quickly walked to the desk and flipped through the files on the table. After looking through them once, she didn't seem to have found anything. She then went to the bookshelf behind her to look for something. There weren't many books in Princess Anchi's study. Most of them were official documents, and most of them were written in Nanjiang. After a long time, a file hidden in the most inconspicuous corner of the bookshelf fell into the eyes of the person in black. What caught her attention was not the file itself, but the seal on it. It was a sunflower-shaped seal. The eyes of the black-clothed man flashed, and a thin blade appeared at his fingertips. He quickly tore open the sealed file. She glanced through it quickly. A faint smile appeared in her beautiful eyes. After resealing the file, she restored the study to its original state. Then she flipped out of the window. In the guest courtyard, Princess Anchi was stopped at the door by an when she arrived with her guards. An looked at the people in front of him with a sullen face and said, Princess, it's so late. What's the matter? Princess Anchi said, assassins just broke into the guest courtyard. Is Miss Chu all right? Assassins? An frowned and said, I've been keeping watch outside. No assassins came in. Princess Anchi was surprised. Her guards would never lie. Besides, she did see several black figures enter the guest courtyard from a distance. Why did Miss Chu's guards deny it? Guard Lin, Miss Chu is young Master Qingchen's fiancée. If she is hurt, I can't explain it to young Master Qingchen. Is it true that no one broke into the guest courtyard? An face was unhappy. He said in a low voice, when there was a quarrel outside, there were several black figures approaching. But they were scared away by my hidden weapons. Some of them should have been injured. But they definitely didn't enter the guest courtyard. Miss Chu's reputation is important. Princess, please be careful with your words. Looking at An gloomy and serious expression, Princess Anchi finally understood why this guard insisted that the assassins didn't come in. The women of the Central Plains were much stricter about their reputation than those in the south. My apologies, Guard Lin. It was this princess's slip of the tongue. She waved her hand to let the guards behind her leave to continue searching for the assassins. Then she turned to An and said, Did the commotion just now scare Miss Chu? Why didn't she come out? An said indifferently, Miss Chu lives in the inner courtyard. Perhaps she didn't hear the commotion outside. Princess Anchi frowned and said, Since it's inconvenient for Guard Lin, this princess will go see Miss Chu in person. It's not good if she's scared. No, princess sister, what's the matter? An was about to refuse when Yi Li's voice came from behind. Yi Li was wearing a large cloak. Her beautiful hair was draped over her shoulders. There was a faint sleepiness and confusion in her eyes. The one holding the lamp beside her was really a maid sent by Princess Anchi to serve her. Princess Anchi smiled and said, It's nothing. Just a few thieves broke in. Did they disturb Miss Chu? Yi Li tilted her head and smiled peacefully. Don't worry, Lin Han's martial arts are very good. He's been protecting me all this time. Lin Han, right? An lowered his head and said respectfully, "That's right. Don't worry, miss. The assassins didn't come in just now. I've already beaten them away." Princess Anshi looked at Yi Li and saw that there was nothing wrong with her. Then she nodded and said, "In that case, Miss Chu should have a good rest. I'll send people to look elsewhere in case any fish escapes the net." "Yes, thank you for your hard work, Princess Sister." Yi Li smiled obediently. Watching Princess Anshi leave, the smile on Yi Li's face gradually disappeared. She turned to the maid beside her and said, "Let's go back." The maid nodded and followed Yi Li to the inner courtyard. As soon as they entered the room, they felt their backs go numb and they fell to the ground. An quietly appeared at the door. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at him, asking, "What's the matter with the assassins?" An said in a low voice, "There were indeed assassins. They should have come for Miss." An walked into the room and pulled out a black-clothed figure from under the bed. A total of 3 people came. They underestimated the enemy too much and were discovered by the princess's guards. After being injured by my hidden weapon, they immediately left. This one was the most seriously injured and was caught by me. Chapter 193. Yi Li squatted down and looked at the person on the ground. He looked like a typical person from Nanjiang. Even though he was wearing black night clothes, he didn't hide his features. They shouldn't be Princess Anshi's men. Chu Liuyun shouldn't have any enemies in Nanjiang. Who dares to chase after the princess and provoke her? An frowned and said, "Could it be that someone else knows about our identities?" Yi Li shook her head. "That's not right. If someone really knows about our identities, I'm afraid it won't be as simple as these few low-level assassins. What happened tonight is more like a demonstration or a provocation to Princess Anshi." "A demonstration? A provocation to Princess Anshi? Is it because of young Master Qing Chen?" An guessed. Yi Li nodded and said thoughtfully, "I think so too. In Nanjiang, the only person related to Chu Liuyun's identity is Big Brother. But what's the use of such a provocation if it doesn't hurt? In comparison, it's more useful to capture me to threaten Big Brother. If Big Brother is in the other party's hands. With these assassins' abilities, they can't take anyone away from the princess residence even if I'm not here. They haven't even touched the guest house, but they have already alerted the princess residence's guards. Such assassins can't even kill people, let alone kidnap someone alive. Miss, can you guess who did it?" Yi Li smiled lightly and said, "I didn't know at first, but I'm quite confident now. Tomorrow, I'll try out your interrogation skills and verify my theory." An knew many interrogation experts, such as the romantic and elegant Feng Sangongzi Feng Ji Yao, the leader of the hidden guards who was responsible for training them, and the Dingguo Wang Fu's steward Uncle Mo, who was solemn and silent but actually had a good heart. However, An never knew that the originally delicate princess consort Ding's master was also an expert in this area. Many times, the 4 of them couldn't help but secretly guess how badly the Yi family treated the princess consort back then to distort a rich young lady from a prestigious family like this. It would take a lot of effort to bring that unlucky assassin out of the princess residence. At this moment, the princess residence was under martial law, and the price of bringing him out might not be proportional to the rewards they would receive. So An didn't plan on waiting until tomorrow. He prepared to pry open that unlucky guard's mouth on the spot. The guest courtyard wasn't small, and Yi Li's room was located in the innermost part of the courtyard, so as long as they didn't shout, even the people outside the courtyard wouldn't notice anything. Of course, the shadow guard who had been hiding in the princess residence would not allow anyone who was not supposed to get close to the guest courtyard. After the unlucky assassin was forced to drink a cup of herbal tea mixed with tendon softening powder, he couldn't scream even if he wanted to. Thus, a few strange scenes appeared in the elegantly decorated room. On one side of the couch lay a maid from Nanjiang who had fallen into a deep sleep. Sitting at the table was a charming young girl who was writing and drawing under the lamp. A few steps away, there was an inhumane interrogation going on under torture. An face darkened as he broke the assassin's left leg bone. That assassin's face was deathly pale and he was drenched in sweat, but he still clenched his teeth and refused to speak. Because of the restrictions of this place, he couldn't use too troublesome and bloody methods. This made Enrech's face become more and more ugly. Even after Yi Li finished dealing with her own matters and raised her head, Enrich still couldn't get the assassin to spit out a single useful sentence. Instead, that assassin almost bit his tongue and committed suicide. Is it no good? Do you need help? Yi Li stood up and asked. Enrech's mouth twitched. He shook his head and said, "There's no need to trouble young miss with this kind of thing. No problem. Even if you break another leg, he still won't confess. Then I'll break all the bones in his body." Enrich coldly stared at the assassin. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "When you break half of his bones, he'll be dead." "What idea does young miss have?" Yi Li leisurely walked over. She squatted down and smiled at the assassin on the ground. She softly said, "Do you understand Central Plains language? Don't worry, I won't be as rough as him." The assassin vigilantly stared at the charming young girl with a kind smile. As an assassin, his intuition told him that this pretty and cute young girl in front of him was the truly dangerous person. "Don't be afraid, I won't break your bones like he did. I plan to remove all the bones in your body," Yi Li said with a smile as she looked at the assassin who was staring at her with vigilance. "Don't be afraid, I won't break your bones like he did. Let's start from your fingers." Her slender white hand held the assassin's left hand. With a catcher sound, a knuckle on the left index finger strangely twisted. Yi Li continued to move downwards. Another crisp sound was heard, and her entire index finger was twisted. The assassin's jaw was dislocated and he couldn't even cry out. He could only make vague "ah" sounds. Yi Li looked at him. "Nod your head whenever you want to, but don't wait until I remove all the bones in your body before you nod. By then, it'll be too late." "Catcher." Yi Li's expression was calm, but her hands were moving in an orderly manner. And it was this kind of calmness that was more frightening than Enrech's threatening words. When Yi Li's hand moved to the assassin's right hand, the assassin who was breathing weakly finally nodded his head with difficulty. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and looked at Enrech from the corner of her eyes. "I thought it was some tough bone, but it's just like this." Enrech silently wiped the sweat from his forehead. He also felt that this assassin was a bit too useless. But at the same time, he felt that his master wasn't scary because of her methods of torturing people, but rather that terrifying calmness. If it was him, he would also be scared. "Very good, but you can't joke with me. Otherwise, the consequences will only make you regret living in this world." Yi Li sincerely looked at him and advised. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction. "Very good. Then tell me who your master is." Waving her hand to indicate for Enrech to close his jaw, Yi Li asked. A trace of fear flashed through the assassin's eyes. He looked at Yi Li and opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. Yi Li wrinkled her brows and thought for a bit before saying, "If you're worried about your life safety, I can guarantee your safety. Moreover, after I finish the matters in Nanjiang, I can give you a sum of money to let you change your surname and start a new life." The assassin's eyes flashed and there was a bit of hesitation on his face. Yi Li saw this and the smile on her face became even more sincere. "Your information is very important to me, so as long as you give me true information, I promise to fulfill the promise. However, I think you should also understand that you're not the only one who knows the information. If you don't say it, others might say it. At that time, I'm very sorry, I can only." Seeing the assassin's nervous expression, Yi Li said with a smile, "No, I won't kill you. When I came to Nanjiang, I passed by a valley that was filled with blood-red flowers. There was also a small snake under each of the flowers. At the time, I was thinking, with so many snakes, what would they eat to grow? What do you think? Snake. Snake Valley. No. It wasn't only the people of the Central Plains who were afraid of a place like Snake Valley. The people of Nanjiang weren't afraid of snakes, but other than the snake tamers, there was no one who wasn't afraid of thousands of uncontrolled poisonous snakes. Chapter 194. Then, your answer. I say, what do you want to ask? Yi Li turned to look at and raised an eyebrow in satisfaction. In reality, she didn't get much information from the assassin. After all, it wasn't likely that the person sent out as cannon fodder was a core figure. However, at least it confirmed part of Yi Li's guess. At the same time, they locked onto the target of Shu Qingchen's disappearance. However, Shu Qingchen's exact location was still unknown. Since it was confirmed that Shu Qingchen's life wasn't in danger for the time being, Yi Li's worried heart finally relaxed. Zhun Wei! Zhun Wei! There was a burst of cheerful shouts on the noisy street. The passers-by all looked over and saw a handsome man wearing white clothes of the Central Plains waving happily at a youth not far away. Yi Li turned back and saw the man in white running towards her. She sighed helplessly and raised a smile. Brother Han, I haven't seen you for a few days. How have you been? Han Mingxi looked at Yi Li with bewitching eyes and hidden bitterness. Zhun Wei, I came thousands of li to Nanjiao with you and you actually abandoned me. You are so cruel. Yi Li unconsciously shivered. Although the passers-by didn't understand what he was saying, seeing his appearance and hearing his tone, they unconsciously looked at them strangely. Brother Han. Yi Li couldn't help but rub her forehead. She did her best to control her temper before smiling. Brother Han has finally slept enough. How rare. Han Mingxi didn't feel guilty at all. He moved closer and smiled. No, I woke up a long time ago and strolled around the city. However, I didn't see Zhun Wei. Zhun Wei, why didn't you tell me about this? Wouldn't it be safer for me to go with you? Yi Li rolled her eyes at him. I'm just looking around. I'm not going into a dragon's den or a tiger's den. Han Mingxi shrugged and said indifferently, even if Zhun Wei wants to go to a dragon's den or a tiger's den, I will go with you. He didn't forget to wink at Yi Li. His eyes were saying, look at how good I am to you. Yi Li frowned. She did not expect to run into Han Mingxi. However, it was obviously very inconvenient to bring Han Mingxi along now. If he didn't bring him along, given Han Mingxi's personality, he really didn't know what kind of mess he would make the Qiani Pavilion make in the capital of Nanjiao. Yi Li lowered her head and thought for a moment. Then she said, Brother Han, let's talk somewhere else. After finding a room in a tea house and sitting down, Yi Li said, Brother Han, I have some matters to attend to. It might not be convenient for you to follow me. Han Mingxi rested his head on the table and glared at Yi Li as he complained, why didn't you say it was inconvenient when you asked for information about the Qiani Pavilion? Now you want to dump me? You're abandoning me after seducing me. Yi Li was speechless. She had paid a corresponding price for the information about the Qiani Pavilion. She didn't ask him to work for free. Seeing that Yi Li didn't want to talk to him, Han Mingxi bit his nails and said with a smile, what can happen in such a small place like Nanjiao? Didn't Zhun Wei come to find the Netherworld flower? I have the information about the Saintess of Nanjiang. Otherwise, it would be Sickly Scholar. I also know the whereabouts of Sickly Scholar, but he seems to be targeted by another group of people. Zhun Wei, it's better not to provoke them. Otherwise, young Master Qingchen is missing, right? Han Mingxi tilted his head and smiled innocently. The Qiani Pavilion's information is indeed worthy of its reputation. Yi Li sighed softly. Han Mingxi said with a smile, does the Qiani Pavilion sell information? There are only a few major events in the capital of Nanjiao recently. What are we doing? So, Zhun Wei, which one do you want to deal with first? Yi Li stared at him. After a long while, she said softly with a smile, do you know where young Master Qingchen is? Han Mingxi's eyes flashed and he said with some dissatisfaction, you want to find him first? Zhun Wei, I thought the Biluo flower and the Netherworld flower were more important to you. Yi Li said, you can take them at any time. If you don't find them, they may not be intact. Han Mingxi looked at her with his chin propped up. You want to know about young Master Qingchen? Tell me, what's your relationship with him? Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, you don't know about Shu Qingchen. Otherwise, you wouldn't be negotiating with me now, right? Han Mingxi snorted and stared at her with a gloomy face. Then do you want the information about the Saintess of Nanjiang? If you don't, I'll burn it. He's my elder brother, Yi Li replied. Han Mingxi frowned. He looked at her up and down for a long time and asked, "Brother? Are you Shu Qingbai or Shu Qingyang? In terms of age, you are more like Shu Qingyang, but in terms of character, you are like Shu Qingbai." But no one said that the young masters of the Shu family know martial arts. Yi Li said with a smile, "It seems that the information of the Tianyi Pavilion is not so reliable. The third young master of the Shu family, Shu Qingfeng, is now serving in the army. Brother Han, don't you know?" Han Mingxi stared at her suspiciously. "Are you really a member of the Shu family?" Yi Li smiled but didn't say anything. She neither admitted nor denied it. Han Mingxi walked back and forth in the room with some irritation. From time to time, he muttered to Yi Li to vent his dissatisfaction, "You lied to me. You are not looking for the Netherworld flower. You are looking for Shu Qingchen. Junwei, you lied to me. Young master." An Er's voice came from outside the door. The door was pushed open from the outside. An Er glanced at Han Mingxi and said to Yi Li, "Young master, there is news." Yi Li nodded, "Come in and talk." Inside the room, Yi Li and an Er both looked at Han Mingxi. However, the usually tactful young master Feng Yu was unexpectedly oblivious. It seemed that he didn't understand the other party's desire for him to leave. He sat in the chair and began to eat the snacks. Yi Li waved her hand helplessly at an Er and said, "Forget it. Just say it." An Er nodded and said in a low voice, "Princess Anchi came into contact with young Master Qingchen today, or someone related to young Master Qingchen." Yi Li frowned. "What do you mean?" An Er said, "When Princess Anchi returned home today, her body was stained with some special incense. The people of Nanjiang don't like incense, so they don't have any special research on incense. But they don't know that in the Central Plains, even the same incense has many different things to pay attention to. For example, among the young masters of the Shu family, other than the third and fifth young masters who don't use incense, the second young master is used to using plum incense. The fourth young master prefers orchid incense. As for young Master Qingchen, because he goes out all year round, the incense is personally made by Madame Shu. She adds some medicine that is beneficial to the body, so he has a very light medicine box. It's definitely not easy for ordinary people to distinguish, and it's even more difficult to imitate and make it." Yi Li frowned. "Where did Princess Anchi go?" "The palace. This morning, the king of Nanjiao summoned Princess Anchi. After leaving the palace, Princess Anchi went straight back home." An Er said with certainty. Han Mingxi smiled curiously. "Young Master Qingchen can't be in the palace, right?" An Er hesitated and said with a frown, "The chance of Princess Anchi seeing young Master Qingchen with her own eyes is not high. From the time Princess Anchi entered and left the palace, other than when she had an audience with the king of Nanjiao, she was basically in our line of sight. It's impossible for her to see young Master Qingchen. Except when she had an audience with the king of Nanjiao. And, after returning home, Princess Anchi sent more people to secretly look for young Master Qingchen." Yi Li shook her head and said, "The king of Nanjiao should know elder brother's identity. If something happens to elder brother in Nanjiao now, it won't do him any good. So, elder brother's chance in the palace is not high. That incense should be a message from him to tell us that he is safe now." Chapter 195. And San didn't understand, since young Master Qingchen is not in the Imperial Palace, why would the message come from the Imperial Palace? Why would the perfume that young Master Qingchen carries with him be in the Imperial Palace? Naturally, it is because the other party may be someone from the Imperial Palace. Even if they are not, they are people who can freely enter and leave the Imperial Palace. Han Mingxi lazily shook his head. "That's not right. Junwei. In Nanjiao, other than the Crown Princess, no one can freely enter and leave the Imperial Palace. This includes the other princesses. Of course, even this princess is not in Nanjiao right now." Yi Li glanced at him. "It is not difficult in the open, but not in the dark." "In the dark?" the two asked in unison. Yi Li frowned and asked, "Have you found the traces of those assassins?" And San nodded. "We found them, but we were a step too late. They were killed on a small mound 2 li outside the city. Their bodies were left in an abandoned cave. Speak carefully. When we were looking for their bodies, we found them in a secluded cave 10 miles west of the city. But there were no signs of fighting at the scene. Although that place was not far from the capital, the road was very difficult to walk on and there was nothing around. Even if those assassins were running for their lives, they should not have forgotten that direction. But fortunately, the hidden weapon that injured them had a tracking medicinal scent. It took an entire night to find them. They should have been killed not long after they left the city. Then the bodies were thrown into that cave. Yi Li rubbed her brows and asked thoughtfully, in which direction were they killed? East. In other words, they originally wanted to go east, but after they were killed, the mastermind threw the bodies to the west. What is there in the east? Yi Li stood. Give me the map of Nanzhao's capital. And San lowered her head and took out a thin piece of paper from her chest and carefully spread it on the table. Han Mingshi looked over and pursed his lips. The entire map of Nanzhao's capital? Junwei, you didn't need to go to the Tianyi Pavilion to gather information, did you? Yi Li smiled and said, the more information we have, the safer we will be. I have always cherished my life. Besides, I don't believe that the Tianyi Pavilion can't come up with this map. This was not a defensive map, but an ordinary map of the layout of a city. He took out a charcoal pencil and circled the imperial palace on the map. He went to Princess Anche's mansion, the place where Xu Qingchen went missing, the place where her body was dumped, and the place where she was killed. He looked up and asked, how do you feel? Han Mingshi pointed at the drawing and said, if you don't look at the location of the corpse and the princess's residence, these locations seem to be very close to the Saint Lady Temple. Speaking of which, if I hadn't seen this picture, I wouldn't have known that the Saint Lady Temple was so close to the palace. The Saint Lady Temple was located on a mountain 5 miles east of the capital. But if you count the distance from the palace and the journey up the mountain, it would take at least 10 miles to get to the Saint Lady Temple. Yi Li pointed and lowered her head. Ordinary people only think that the road from the Imperial Palace to the Saint Lady Temple is not close. Moreover, the Imperial Palace is built on a mountain. The mountain behind the Imperial Palace is steep and dangerous. It is difficult to get to the Saint Lady Temple from the mountain, and it will take more time than leaving the city directly. So basically, no one has paid attention to it. In fact, the distance between the Imperial Palace and the Saint Lady Temple is less than 2 miles. Tunnel? And San asked. Haven't we seen the ability of the people of Nanjiang to dig tunnels on our way here? Yi Li asked with a smile. The two of them thought of the almost hollowed-out mountain at the same time and fell silent. What did the king of Nanzhao, who founded the country, think? Why did he still build the Imperial Palace? Han Mingshi asked in confusion. In the history of the Central Plains, only temporary palaces or side palaces would be built on mountains. The real imperial palaces were all located in the center of the capital city. It not only showed the nobility of the royal family, but also showed the majesty of the people. Yi Li replied without much seriousness, the customs are different. Han Mingshi could tell at a glance that she was just being perfunctory. He glared at Yi Li unhappily for a long time and found that the other party was still immersed in her own thoughts. Han Mingshi's face suddenly darkened. After coughing twice to attract the attention of the two people in the side room, Han Mingshi smiled and said, "You suspect that young Master Qingchen is in the Saint Lady Temple? As everyone knows, the Saint Lady of Nanjiang is as pure as ice and as pure as jade. The Saint Lady Temple does not allow men to enter, let alone harbor men. If people know that you think so, believe me, you will be drowned by the anger of the people of Nanzhao." Yi Li said indifferently, "Is it because everyone knows that it is more likely?" Han Mingshi rolled his eyes. "Then how can young Master Junwei enter the Saint Lady Temple, which is as guarded as the Imperial Palace, and find young Master Qingchen who is hidden somewhere? If we can't find him and you are found, we will really be killed by the people of Nanzhao." "I don't plan to enter through the Saint Lady Temple," Yi Li said. Han Mingshi's face was full of shock and admiration. "So young Master Junwei plans to brave the Nanzhao Imperial Palace? Brother Junwei, even if the Nanzhao Imperial Palace is not even a third of the size of our Chu capital, Can you not look down on them? Don't forget, there are no poisonous snakes in our Chu capital's imperial palace, but Nanjiao might not. Yi Li smiled faintly. You speak as if young Master Feng Yu has never been to the imperial palace. Who was it that bragged a few days ago that someone had visited the imperial palaces of various countries? Han Mingxi was speechless. For some reason, she began to silently regret bragging about her past romantic history to Jun Wei when she was bored during the journey. Even if you go in and find young Master Qingchen, how will you bring him out? Han Mingxi asked. As far as I know, young Master Qingchen does not know martial arts at all. Yi Li frowned and said, I have to think about it carefully. They definitely couldn't force their way in. Even if the Shadow Guard was strong enough to snatch someone from the Nanjiao Imperial Palace, it would be troublesome to deal with the aftermath. If outsiders knew that the people who made the move were from the Ding Imperial Palace, it would be even more troublesome. Seeing her frown in deep thought, Han Mingxi smiled cheerfully and said, How is it? Do you need help? Yi Li looked at Han Mingxi and shook her head. She and Han Mingxi were only partners. Last time, Han Mingxi had taken many risks with her. This time, no matter what, she couldn't drag him into the danger. Han Mingxi looked at her with a smile and said, Don't be so quick to refuse. In any case, the Tianyi Pavilion is a business. As long as Jun Wei can afford it, we can do more than just collect information. Yi Li's heart was moved. She looked at Han Mingxi and asked, What does Brother Han want? Han Mingxi smiled proudly and said, Aromatic Elegance Pavilion, I want 20% more. Yi Li said, I thought the Tianyi Pavilion liked real money. You should know that no matter how much it is, whether it's the Shu family or me, we will give it to you. Han Mingxi looked at her with grievance and said, Jun Wei and I are friends. How can friends take advantage of others' difficulties? Friends? Yi Li faintly raised her eyebrows and said, The Tianyi Pavilion is not good at these things. I don't want to trouble Brother Han. Jun Wei, you are too polite. Han Mingxi smiled and said, Although the Tianyi Pavilion is not good at these things, we are very familiar with the Nanjiao Imperial City. Compared to our friendship, don't you think the Tianyi Pavilion is more trustworthy? Yi Li frowned and pondered for a while before saying, Then I'll have to trouble Brother Han. After this, I will be responsible for the Tianyi Pavilion's losses. Of course, the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion's 20% share will remain the same. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.